Tion, and others, all men of the north. Black Jack Bulwer led the third. Each party carried with them a pair of ravens. It was no easy thing to watch them ride off into the wild, knowing that the chances were good that they might never return. They are all seasoned men, John told himself, but his uncle Benjamin and his rangers had been seasoned men as well, and the haunted forest had swallowed them up without a trace. When two of them finally came straggling back to the wall, it had been as whites. Not for the first time, or the last, John found himself wondering what had become of Benjamin Stark. Some part of Lord Eddard perhaps sought to search for his brother, one last time, to know for certain whether he lived or died. Perhaps they will come upon some sign of them, he told himself, never truly believing it. John stepped outside. Castle Black seemed a bleak and forlorn place in the pale dawn light. My command, John reflected ruefully, as much a ruin as it is a stronghold. The Lord Commander's tower was a shell, the common hall a pile of blackened timbers, and Hardin's tower looked as if the next gust of wind would knock it over, though it had looked that way for years. Behind them rose the wall, immense, forbidding, frigid, a crawl with builders pushing up a new switchback stair to join the remnants of the old. They worked from dawn to dusk. Without the stair, there was no way to reach the top of the wall save by winch. That would not serve if the wildlings should attack again. Halfway down the winding steps, he came upon Samwell Tarly, headed up. "John," he called out. "The king has sent me for my books, and for you." "Did he say why?" Sam looked uncertain. "I don't know if I am supposed to speak of it." "The king didn't say not to, and you will know soon enough. Only, if you're not meant to say anything, then don't." Sam turned red. "His Grace asked me many questions." Did you tell him about my father?" "No, but surely he knows." "Do you think he'll send me back?" "Would he have me ride him or treat with him?" Sam's fat cheeks seemed to drain of color. No, he felt uneasy, and had no patience for tears. "The Night's Watch takes no part, Sam. He won't ask you to, and if he does, that's what you tell him." Sam looked like he wanted to say more, but, sensing his displeasure, thought better of it. "You should go. I'll come later, as soon as I've found the tomes." Above the king's tower the great standard of House Targaryen cracked like a whip from the roof where Jon Snow had prowled with bow in hand not long ago, slaying thans and free folk beside Satin and deaf Dick Follard. Today, king's men guarded that roof, and outside his father's door stood Sirs Arthur Dayne and Oswell Went, flanked by 20 knights. Within his father's rooms it was warm, the fire recently stoked. King Rhaegar sat before a rough-hewn table, covered with books and parchment and the broken war horn from the cache Jon had found buried under the fist. But it was at the fire Rhaegar looked, his look serene and rested, as though he were in his own rooms and not here, at the edge of the world. Without the crown and in the glow of the firelight, he looked younger than his years, as he had perhaps when he was a young prince, and all of Westeros loved him. He seemed untroubled, and it was that which made Jon uneasy. There were things Rhaegar had shared with him which few in the realm knew, the scrolls he had read, the prophecy that hung over him like a sword, until his Visenya was born with a cock and he let his dreams go, as a boy might when he becomes a man. Kill the boy. Except his father had done it too late, if at all. No one ever looked for a girl, Maester Aemon had said, smiling as tears pooled in his glassy eyes, the day word reached them of the dragons. It was a prince that was promised, not a princess. Rhaegar, I thought. What fools we were, who thought ourselves so wise. The error crept in from the translation. Dragons are neither male nor female, Bath saw the truth of that, but now one and now the other, as changeable as flame. The language misled us all for 1,000 years. Daenerys is the one, born amidst salt and smoke. The dragons prove it. The dragons had been proof for his father too, that he was right, in a way, though wrong in 1,000 others. More than that, they had put a seed of hope in his heart that closed his eyes to everything else before him. Jon took a knee, but his father quickly motioned to him to rise. Once he did, he saw the parchment in his hand. "Read this," the king commanded. Jon took it, and read the letter quickly. Lord Tyrell writes Aegon delays on setting a wedding date for his daughter Margaery. He suspects the prince seeks to break his oath, and set her aside. He asks for your grace to intervene. Aegon wouldn't. The boy he once knew wouldn't, the child who was so innocent that John oft times forgot who was the elder brother and who the younger. The prince had been so well-mannered and obedient, always speaking of what was right and wrong. Memories prodded at him, of Egon, no older than 8 or 9, bringing him trinkets and treats from King's Landing. "Father told me sharing is good," he would say, as he would cut a ripe blackberry tart in half and took the smaller piece for himself. "Being greedy is wrong." Anything left behind which Egon did not touch or taste, John's mother would throw away after the prince was gone, fearing poison or some dark magic. John had almost forgotten that. The last time he had seen him, they were saying goodbye. He hardly recognized the brother he'd hugged then, a smiling man with watchful eyes, who guided the conversation so masterfully, as though they were crossing a rope bridge. Why this careful prince might break his word and set aside his Tyrell bride, John could not guess. He has a dragon now, he remembered suddenly, and needs not answer to anyone. And Egon was nothing if he was not cautious. He would set aside Margaery because he seeks to leave himself unattached, John thought, for who could put a value to a prince's hand? There was a cleverness to it, perhaps, a deeper reason. All across the 7 kingdoms, lords would be scrambling to bring forward their daughters, to make them queen. Egon would have his pick, and with it whatever price he asked. But what lord had more to give than Mace Tyrell? Tywin Lannister perhaps, though he would have to choose some niece or cousin for that. The Aerys fields had not been burned by the Ironborn and their stores healthy, but the Arryn family tree was a sad, diminished thing. Some rich noblewoman from Essos then, some Lysen who brings with her ships and gold and grain. Yes, the king said, his voice soft as summer rain. Mace Tyrell's words will spread through the kingdom, and before long they will reach the wall. It cannot distract us from the task at hand. His father regarded him for a long moment, but it seemed to John he was looking elsewhere altogether, brooding on secret things long past and turning over in his mind the things to come. "Sir Oswell would have me leave the wall and go south now," he said, at last. "What say you?" John thought of all the questions before them, yet answered. The matter of Mance Rayder, the free folk, the watch, slowly starving. He thought of the king's men who filled the castle, waiting for the wildlings to strike again, practicing their drills away from the northerners, eager to return to their keeps before winter began. And he thought most of all of the undead things that creeped beyond the wall, and what they might mean to do next. "If your grace leaves, and take the king's guard with you, some might say you have abandoned them," said John. "They will think you do not mean to return." The king nodded. "So I said to Sir Oswell. Then, we must think of what to do without the Tyrells." John frowned. "So, it is true. We made the match when Egon was a boy, and now he is a man and says he did not consent. You will speak of this to no one. In dark times such as these, we should expect treachery and cowardice." The cryptic words left him uneasy. If they abandon our cause, what do they take with them? If the Tyrells did not heed the call and come to the wall, John wondered what Rhaegar would do. The king punished treason with death. Robert Baratheon and the Greyjoys were proof enough of that, and it was treason indeed to ignore the command of the king. Would Mace Tyrell join them, his head on a spike? It will not be that easy. There would be war, the south would bleed, and all eyes and swords would turn away from the wall. "Food," John replied. "They will hoard their harvests for themselves, and the Riverlands cannot feed us and all of West Eos. And with it their swords, and those of any bannerman who obey them over the Iron Throne. They would take with them peace, and bring rebellion on the cusp of winter. I heard Tywin Lannister once say that every great lord has unruly bannermen who envy him his place. My own father had the Darklins, Lord Tywin had the Rains and Tarbecks, Hoster Tully had Walder Free, the Starks had the Boltons. And the Tyrells have the Florents, and the Tarlis his father told him. Not Hightower, John noticed. Sam said Lord Hightower was as wealthy as the Lannisters and could command thrice as many swords as any of Highgarden's other bannermen. And the Redwynes had the ships. They were bound by blood to the Tyrells, John remembered. Would they join them in their anger? As you say, your grace. The Night's Watch takes no part. This was a matter for a princeling, not a brother of the watch. And that princeling should be commanded to do his duty, and spare us the headache. His father could not see what was before them, and in his blindness left things forgotten, unattended to, like discarded scraps for his advisers to pick up. He had locked himself in Maester Eamon's tower for weeks, poring over old scrolls, and now he spoke of the south. Before them lay winter and thousand choices, so they may have a hope of surviving the year, much less face what crawled towards them beyond the wall. The northerners are restless, your grace. They need to be put to work, or this idleness will lead them south, back to their homes. There are 19 forts along the wall, and men only in 5. I have spoken to Lord Stark and he will give me 3,000 to garrison them. 3,000 is not enough, said the king, too quickly. I mean to ask your grace for more. You have sent the Prince of Dragonstone to King's Landing to marshal your lords for battle, but we do not know when the wildlings will strike again, nor the others if they mean to attack us. If your grace agrees, I would have 1,000 men each from the Iron Islands, Dorne, the Reach, the Westerlands, the Crown Lands, the Vale and the Riverlands. The Night's Watch would number 10,000 strong. 9,000, if the Reach disobeyed. And John was not sure how many the Iron Islands could muster, after the war. The men do not have to take their vows, they only have to repair our keeps and defend the wall, John added. They do not even have to be knights. You have no time to train the dregs of the dungeons, John. But you will not get that many, not yet. Perhaps 300, at most. The Greyjoys were defeated at a cost, and the lords will hold back the greater part of the strength that remains to them until the true war. I will write to Connington. It would not be as easy as a simple letter, but he would leave that to the king. John had enough of his own men to muster. There was a rap at the door. The Tarly boy, the king remembered. Bring him in. John opened the door and in came Sam, clutching a stack of books, bowing stiffly. Tell me what you have learned, Samwell. He licked his lips. The others are mentioned in the annals, though not as often as I would have thought. The annals I've found and looked at, that is. There's more I haven't found, I know. Some of the older books are falling to pieces. The pages crumble when I try and turn them. And the really old books, either they have crumbled all away or they are buried somewhere that I haven't looked yet, or, well, it could be that there are no such books and never were. The oldest histories we have were written after the Andals came to Westeros. The first men only left us runes on rocks, so everything we think we know about the Age of Heroes and the Dawn Age and the Long Night comes from accounts set down by septons thousands of years later. There are archmaesters at the Citadel who question all of it. Those old histories are full of kings who reigned for hundreds of years, and knights riding around 1,000 years before there were knights. Brandon the Builder, Simon Star-Eyes, Night's King, we say that John is the 998th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, but the oldest list I've found shows 674 commanders, which suggests that it was written during. Long ago. John broke in. His father knew this and more, most like. What about the others? I found mention of dragon glass. The children of the forest used to give the Night's Watch 100 obsidian daggers every year, during the Age of Heroes. The others come when it is cold, most of the tales agree. Or else it gets cold when they come. Sometimes they appear during snowstorms and melt away when the sky's clear. They hide from the light of the sun and emerge by night, or else night falls when they emerge. Some stories speak of them riding the corpses of dead animals. Bears, direwolves, mammoths, horses, it makes no matter, so long as the beast is dead. Some accounts speak of giant ice spiders too. I don't know what those are. Men who fall in battle against the others must be burned, or else the dead will rise again as their thralls. I have read that the summers have grown shorter and the winters longer when the last dragon died during the reign of King Aegon the Dragonborn, the king added. The others come when it is cold, and they bring the cold with them. Both are true. We knew all this. The question is, how do we fight them? Asked John. The armor of the others is proof against most ordinary blades, if the tales can be believed, and their own swords are so cold they shatter steel. Fire will dismay them, though, and they are vulnerable to obsidian. I found one account of the Long Night that spoke of the last hero slaying others with a blade of dragosteel. Supposedly they could not stand against it. Dragosteel. The term was new to John. Valyrian steel. That was my first thought as well, said Sam. How many men at the wall carry swords of Valyrian steel? Asked the king. It did not take long to count. 2, your grace. Myself and Lord Stark. House Targaryen lost their own blades long ago. His father's knights had searched Castle Black for Dark Sister, last wielded by Brynden Rivers, but found nothing. Its last bearer had taken its secret with him. It is named Dragosteel for it was forged by Dragonfire, Roriger said. But we have lost the knowledge to forge them. Valyrian steel will not be our salvation. We must look instead to dragon glass, as the children of the forest did. We know beyond doubt that works, or your brothers would not call you Sam the Slayer. The king meant it kindly, but Sam turned red and would have begun stammering if Jon did not intercede. When Sam stabbed the other's armor with the dagger, the other dissolved, Jon said. Its armor ran down in rivulets and smoked, and it puddled away in no more than half a minute. And the dagger kept, though it wreathed in steam and sweating. But it was not so with the wight I killed, though we had no obsidian with which to fight it. It was not made of ice, but flesh and blood, but even when we hacked its head off, its headless corpse pulled its own dagger from its sheath and buried it in Sir Jeremy Rytker's bowels. We drove the wights away with fire at the fist, your grace, but only for a time, Sam managed to say. But Gren had a torch too, and the other slashed it with his sword. It made a terrible sound. Perhaps it slashed at it because it feared it. But it cannot slash away at dragon fire. And as for obsidian, we have plenty enough of that. My armorers in King's Landing are fashioning into daggers and arrowheads, and soon sailing it north, the king said. Thank you, Sam. Keep reading, there are books in Castle Black even I have not seen, nor the wisest in the citadel. But in your tale perhaps lies more wisdom than all the tomes. I would have you write it down and send a raven to Marwyn the Midge, so he may study it. You will meet him soon, I hope, but my dragon riders have bigger need of him now. Sam bowed again. Yes, your grace. Do the books say what they want? Jon asked. They mean to come south, as they did during the long night, and sweep over the wall, the king replied. That is clearer than ink. Now was his chance. Perhaps so. If that's the case, we will need to learn where they hide. Mance Rayder has fought the others. He knows the haunted forest better than any ranger, and many who rode with him come from the distant north and lands uncharted by any man or maester south of the wall, said Jon. Bring him into your council, your grace. Your cause is the same. In his expression, Jon knew the king would have snorted if he was a cruder sort of man. Our cause against the others, perhaps, but with a horn and feigned magic he threatened to bring down the wall and doom Westeros. If we free him from captivity, what more might he do? Have his men slay us all in our sleep, so he and his people can press south, and open the gates so the rest of the wildlings might pass, and with them the others. He had told his father what Ygritte said, that the horn of Joramun was false. It was kept under guard, awaiting the day the king's maester would arrive to the wall and study its markings. Jon wondered now if he had done the right thing. Mance's threat to blow the horn was desperate, yes. But how can a king not be desperate when his people are hunted by dead things they know not how to fight? He knows the fall of the wall would be the death of everything living and whole, and I believe he would share what he knows. King Roriger repeated. Jon had known the word was a mistake as soon as he said it. Did he doom Mance with that word? King. Kings must live and die for their people, and the price Mance Rayder will ask for his knowledge is to open the gates and let his people pass. Those with him now and countless thousands more to come. Are you prepared to do that? There is no other way. If the free folk are on the other side of the wall when the others come, they will fall and rise as wights, and we will have countless thousands more to fight, said Jon. Your grace, he added, quickly. And your uncle. Before he was king, this Mance Rayder was a sworn brother of the Night's Watch. The penalty for desertion is death, as you well know. Will your uncle suffer him to remain unpunished? That was the question he had turned over 100 times in his head. He found himself thinking of the deserter his uncle had beheaded the day they'd found the direwolves. You said the words Lord Eddard had told him. You took a vow, before your brothers, before the old gods and the new. Desmond and Fat Tom had dragged the man to the stump. Bran's eyes had been wide as saucers, and Jon had to remind him to keep his pony in hand. I am walking on a bridge of ice with an abyss on either side. If Roriger chose to pardon Mance, a king's word could not be overturned, even by the Lord of Winterfell. His father would have to bear Lord Eddard's displeasure, as he had for 20 years past. The question of what to do with the wildlings once they crossed was even thornier. Rob told him of Lord Eddard's dream of raising new lords and settling them in the abandoned holdfasts of the gift. The watch would have yielded back a part of the gift, in exchange for the new lordlings paying taxes to Castle Black. Princess Daenerys' dowry would have paid for the mortar, Rickon and Bran would have been raised as lords. Jon would see that land filled with free folk instead. It was too late to plant crops now. They would need food, and lots of it, and that meant coin. But Lord Eddard had come to see that would not come to pass. They had spoken long before his uncle left on his ranging. The wildlings needed to come through, they had agreed, and a defense organized so the castles of the Watch could be manned and supplied, with places to retreat to if the wall fell. As for the gift, he could raise new lords, young men of lesser blood who might be willing to wed a wildling in exchange for a keep and lands. It would have to be handled with carefully. To the northerners, the wildlings were less than human. But his uncle believed it could be done. Not now, however, Lord Eddard had insisted on that. The wildlings would remain upon the wall, where men with wives and children, all orphan girls and any orphan boys below the age of 10, old women, widowed mothers, and any women who did not care to fight would be housed in the Watch's abandoned castles. The spearwives would be sent to Long Barrow, single men to other forts, and any who took the Black would remain in Castle Black, or be posted to Eastwatch or the Shadow Tower. As for Mance Rayder, Jon and Lord Eddard were not in agreement. Lord Eddard believes he should die. Jon would not lie. But I know the only man who can bind the wildlings to us is Mance Rayder. I will think on it. Jon knew how long might take his father to think. He pressed on. You have told me stories of the long night since I was a child. That day is here. If we don't stop it, the White Walkers will come, kill us, and send our dead against us. The Night's Watch holds the wall. We swore an oath. I am the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers, the shield that guards the realms of men. And what are the wildlings, if not men? I will think on it, his father repeated, not unkindly. Leave your books with me, Samwell Tarly. I thank you both for your counsel. Share nothing of what we have said. That will be enough for today. Sam barely hid his relief. As they went to the door, Jon's father stopped him with a word. Jon, where are your guards? I do not see you with them. I mislike it, your grace. It makes me feel like a duck leading a procession of ducklings. His father smiled at that. Mother Duck or Lord Commander, I should prefer to see you with them than without. As you say, your grace. He made the rounds of Castle Black after that, visiting the men on watch and hearing their reports firsthand, watching Ulmer and his charges at the archery butts, talking with King's men and Northerners alike, walking the ice atop the wall to have a look at the forest. Ghost found him, and padded after him, a white shadow at his side. Ghost slept at the foot of the bed that night, and for once Jon did not dream he was a wolf. Even so, he slept fitfully, tossing for hours before sliding down into a nightmare. His mother was in it, pleading with him not to take his vows, but he rode away from her and left her alone in the wolf's wood, shadows growing dark around her. When he woke, he found there were tears in his eyes. He wiped them away, suddenly angry, though he could have said with who nor why. The wildlings crossed the wall a fortnight later. His father had found it in his heart to forgive Mance Rayder for his treason, where the Greyjoys and Robert Baratheon had lost their heads. He had heard him call Balon Greyjoy's rebellion a waste of men and ships, but most of all of time. Jon suspected it was as much for that as anything else that he had not been spared. But he had come to see that more would be lost without Mance. Today, Rhaegar Targaryen sat in his courser and looked like a king. Both man and horse were armored in black, his father's inlaid with rubies in the shape of the three-headed dragon. Beneath the plate was golden ringmail, and his helm flowed with gold, orange, and red silken streamers. As close to a dragon as a man can be, Jon thought, but it would be better still if the real dragons were here. The sight of them would have given the free folk hope, would have bound them to his father in a way mere words could not do. Flanked around him were his Kingsguard, Sir Arthur Dayne, Sir Oswell Went, Prince Lewin Martell and Sir Franklin Fowler, the Dornishman called the Old Hawk, who had given up rule of Skiriach and taken his vows 10 years past after Jon at Hordiari's death. They shone in their armor of white enameled scales, brilliant as a field of new fallen snow and pale as milk, with silver chasing and clasps that glittered in the sun. The king's men too were a horse. John saw the banners of houses Celtigar, Valerian, Massey and Hayford and Blackmont, Illyrian, Santager and Vaith. The Northerners are here too, John thought with relief. The king beyond the wall was brought forward, flanked by 10 knights on each side and banner holders carrying the Targaryen standards. He looked as he had when John first saw him, uncrowned and unadorned, wearing only wool and leather and his ragged black wool cloak patched with faded red silk. His face was still and grim, and when he was brought before the king, Roriger at last took off his helm. Roriger's face was still and proud, his silver hair swirling around him as the ribbons on his helm had. Whatever words passed between them were lost in the wind. But John knew the price that had been paid in exchange for Manst's life. The wildlings were to give up children including Manst's own son, 50 all, to be cared for by their mothers, hostages too. Each chieftain would hand over his son, and all would give whatever wealth they had to be divided between the Watch and the Iron Throne to provision the war. And most of all Mance, who would be held at the king's command, until the masses of wildlings that hid beyond the wall, preparing for a second attack, crossed the wall and Roriger was sufficiently satisfied of their loyalty. There was no point in keeping hostages if one was not prepared to take their heads. As John watched Val, standing in the cold as still as if she had been carved of salt, holding Manst's infant in her arms, he wondered what his father would serve the free folk if they rose and proved treacherous. Fire and blood, he did not doubt. "We stand at the edge of an abyss," said the king, his voice like music, like a mournful song of old. "Beyond the wall await terrors untold, demons of frost that fear no blade and leave undead men in their wake. You cannot defeat them alone. We cannot defeat them alone. Cross the wall and enter with us the realm of living. The dragons will light our way as a beacon and bring to the world a summer that never ends. Open the gates," called Arthur Dane. It set out a chorus. "Open the gates," another bellowed, a third echoed. Sharpened stakes were wrenched from the ground, planks were dropped across deep ditches, and the stockade gates were thrown wide. Jon Snow raised his hand and lowered it, and his black ranks parted right and left, clearing a path to the wall, where Dolorous Ed Tolet pushed open the iron gate. Wagons were driven out from beneath the wall, loaded with apples and bread, rattling and groaning over the ground. Even now, a ship sailed from King's Landing to Eastwatch with replenishments for the stores. The first of many shipments, yet the king had promised that before he lost the reach. Even still, the sight of all that food made Jon nervous. King's men who a few days ago had sneered at the wildlings and called them savages went to the carts now, taking food in hand. And the free folk came. Slowly at first, some limping or leaning on their fellows, the captives began to emerge from their rough-hewn pen. Hesitant, wary of some trap, the first few prisoners edged across the planks and through the ring of the stakes, toward the wall. The bravest of them took the bread and apples, biting into them gingerly at first and then ferociously, as though it was mutton. More followed, when they saw that no harm had come to those who went before. Then more, until it was a steady stream. A few turned for the forest. He watched a young woman stumble away with a child on either hand. Every few steps she looked back to make certain no one was coming after them, and when she neared the trees she broke into a run. But most came on. Here was Sigorn, the Magna of Thun, Rattleshirt, 2 chiefs of the Hornfoot. There was an old wise woman revered by the peoples of the Milkwater. A scrawny dark-eyed boy of 2 and 10, the son of Alfin Crowkiller. Horlek, brother to Harmadog's head, with her pigs came. The king had not made them kneel. Jon advised him to let them keep their pride, and he had listened. Jon had loved him for that. Behind them was only cold and death. Ahead was hope. The wildlings shuffled past the ranks of the Black Brothers to the gate. Jon had detailed horse and sat in and half a dozen others to lead them through the wall with torches. On the far side, bowls of hot onion soup awaited them, and chunks of black bread and sausage. Clothes as well, cloaks, breeches, boots, tunics, good leather gloves. They would sleep on piles of clean straw, with fires blazing to keep the chill of night at bay. And in the morning, he would send out Val to search out Tormund's host and pray the man and his host would cross the wall in peace. Jon watched the few remaining wildlings melt into the streets, and with them the giants, 2 riding on the back of a mammoth, the other 2 afoot. Only the dead were left behind. Lord Steward Jon told Marsh, "Break up that stockade for firewood and throw the corpses in the flames." "As my lord commands." Marsh barked out orders, and a swarm of his stewards broke from ranks to attack the wooden walls. The Lord Steward watched them, frowning. "These wildlings, do you think they will keep faith, my lord?" "Some will. Not all. We have our cowards and our knaves, our weaklings and our fools, as do they. Our vows, we are sworn to protect the realm. Once the free folk are settled in the gift, they will become part of the realm," John pointed out. "These are desperate days, and like to grow more desperate. We have seen the face of our real foe, a dead white face with bright blue eyes. The free folk have seen that face as well. We must make common cause with the wildlings." "Common cause against a common foe, I could agree with that," said Bowen Marsh, "but that does not mean we should allow tens of thousands of half-starved savages through the wall. Let them return to their villages and fight the others there, whilst we seal the gates once Lord Stark and the Rangers return. It will not be difficult, Athel tells me. We need only fill the tunnels with chunks of stone and pour water through the murder holes. The wall does the rest. The cold, the weight, in a moon's turn, it will be as if no gate had ever been. Any foe would need to hack his way through. Or climb." "Unlikely," said Bowen Marsh. "These are not raiders, out to steal a wife and some plunder. Tormund will have old women with him, children, herds of sheep and goats, even mammoths. He needs a gate, and only 3 of those remain. And if he should send climbers up, well, defending against climbers is as simple as spearing fish in a kettle. Fish never climb out of the kettle and shove a spear through your belly." John had climbed the wall himself. Marsh went on. "Man's raiders bowmen must have loosed 10,000 arrows at us, judging from the number of spent shafts we've gathered up. Fewer than 100 reached our men atop the wall, most of those lifted by some errant gust of wind. Red Alyn of the Rosewood was the only man to die up there, and it was his fall that killed him, not the arrow that pricked his leg. Donal Noye died to hold the gate. A gallant act, yes, but if the gate had been sealed, our brave armourer might still be with us. Whether we face 100 foes or 100,000, so long as we're atop the wall and they are below, they cannot do us harm." He's not wrong. Mance Rayder's host had broken against the wall like a wave upon a stony shore, though the defenders were no more than a handful of old men, green boys, and cripples. Yet what Bowen was suggesting went against all of John's instincts. "If we seal the gates, we cannot send out rangers," he pointed out. "We will be as good as blind. Lord Mormont's last ranging cost the Watch a quarter of its men, my lord. We need to conserve what strength remains us. Every death diminishes us. Take the high ground and win the battle, my uncle used to say. No ground is higher than the wall, Lord Commander. The king will never allow us to seal the gates. He does not mean for us to sit and wait until our enemies come to us, but to root them out in the dark places where they gather their strength." Marsh hesitated. "My lord, House Stark has always been a friend to the Watch. One day the king and his men will leave and it is them we will have to deal with once more. If we let these wildlings spill over their lands, to steal and pillage and rape with winter at the door, the Watch can never call on them again. I do this with Lord Stark's consent and only out of desperate need." Jon Snow glanced toward the stockade. "I will leave you to finish here, Bowen. Make certain every corpse is burned. Thank you for your counsel. I promise you, I will think on all you've said." Jon turned his horse and rode for Castle Black. The wall loomed on his right as he crossed the yard. Its high ice glimmered palely, but down below all was shadow. At the gate a dim orange glow shone through the bars where the guards had taken refuge from the wind. Jon could hear the creak of chains as the winch cage swung and scraped against the ice. Up top, the sentries would be huddling in the warming shed around a brazier, shouting to be heard above the wind. Or else they would have given up the effort, and each man would be sunk in his own pool of silence. "I should be walking the ice. The wall is mine." He was walking beneath the shell of the Lord Commander's tower, past the spot where Ygritte had died in his arms, when Ghost appeared beside him, his warm breath steaming in the cold. In the moonlight, his red eyes glowed like pools of fire. The taste of hot blood filled Jon's mouth, and he knew that Ghost had killed that night. "No," he thought. "I am a man, not a wolf." He rubbed his mouth with the back of a gloved hand and spat. The armory was dark and silent. Jon nodded to the guards before making his way past the silent racks of spears to his rooms. He hung his sword belt from a peg beside the door and his cloak from another. When he peeled off his gloves, his hands were stiff and cold. It took him a long while to get the candles lit. Ghost curled up on his rug and went to sleep, but John could not rest yet. The scarred pinewood table was covered with maps of the wall and the lands beyond, a roster of rangers, and a letter from the Shadow Tower written in Sir Denys Mallister's flowing hand. He read the letter from the Shadow Tower again, sharpened a quill, and unstoppered a pot of thick black ink. He wrote 2 letters, the first to Sir Denys, the second to Cotter Pike. Both of them had been hounding him for more men. Halder and Toad he dispatched west to the Shadow Tower, Gren and Pyp to Eastwatch by the sea. The ink would not flow properly, and all his words seemed curt and crude and clumsy, yet he persisted. When he finally put the quill down, the room was dim and chilly, and he could feel its walls closing in. Perched above the window, the old bear's raven peered down at him with shrewd black eyes. My last friend, John thought ruefully. And I had best outlive you, or you'll eat my face as well. Ghost did not count. Ghost was closer than a friend. Ghost was part of him. John rose and climbed the steps to the narrow bed that had once been Donal Noye's. This is my lot, he realized as he undressed, from now until the end of my days. It was snowing when they found the heads beyond the wall. The spears were 8 feet long and made of ash, smooth and straight, and at the top of each was impaled a severed head. The beards were full of ice, and the falling snow had given them white hoods. Where their eyes had been, only empty sockets remained, black and bloody holes that stared down in silent accusation. Black Jack Bulwer. Hairy Hal. Garth Greyfeather. Blan. Bearded Ben. Ulmer. The gifts of the wildlings, left in the black of night. They had sent riders, envoys from the free folk, to gather the rest of their people and bring them safely south of the wall. Val had found Tormund and his host of 3,000, and the Northerners, King's men, and Black Brothers had nearly come to blows when John said he would let them pass. It was as dark as night as when Robb's wolf had nearly killed Harry on Carsduck. The Northerners would not suffer any more wildlings to cross, and without Lord Eddard here to command them, they had argued loudly about savages and rapers that John thought to unleash over their lands. Some had daughters and wives stolen by wildlings, John remembered, but when a knight from House Celtigar spoke out that it was not only the word of the Lord Commander but the king, it had inflamed them more. Some of the brothers who had been John's friends came to his defense then, and the anger was thick enough to reach a tipping point until the king himself stood in the middle of the common hall, and silenced them with a word. Sir Denys had written of great camps in the mountains beyond the Shadow Tower dispersing, where Tormund said the Weeper had meant to try the Bridge of Skulls again. That was welcome news when he first heard it, but as John looked out at the corpses he knew they were the work of the Weeper. He was faithless, hated even by the other raiders, but what message did he seek to send now with this massacre? Perhaps his host dispersed, when they heard Mance was alive, that he had made peace with the king. Perhaps with this he meant to say he would not make peace, even if the half-starved people he led would. Stranger still was the news from Hardham, where woods which led thousands of free folk who fled the battle. Cotter Pike's galleys sailed past Hardham from time to time, and said there was no shelter there but the caves. The Screaming Caves. Mother Mole and those who followed her would perish there, of cold and starvation. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Envoys had been sent to them too, but none had returned. John grasped the spear that bore Garth Greyfeather's head and wrenched it violently from the ground, and commanded Bowen Marsh to pull down the other 2 and burn them. The man had enough grace not to say anything, but there was accusation in his eyes, a look that seemed to say, we should never have sent out rangers. I have sent them to their deaths. And with them, the best men of the north. Lord Eddard and Robb were still out there, somewhere. Alive. Ghost would have felt it if Grey Wind was dead. Sam found him when he returned to Castle Black, flushed and out of breath. John, my lord. What news, Sam? Of late, it had been more foul than fair. A letter from Cotter Pike. Prince Lewin had returned with 2 galleys from King's Landing laden with food, and a third has arrived from the Vale. John Arryn sends 250 men and weapons to replenish the armory. That last piece was Lord Eddard's work, a seed he'd planted before he left on the ranging. There was much and more they needed. They'd had the healers a few months, but needed still the maesters from Old Town and 100 things more. But it was a start. John's heart would have been lightened, if he had not seen what he had that morning. Black Jack Bulwer, Hairy Hal, Garth Greyfeather, Blan, Bearded Ben, Alma. He would not forget their names. Good John said, we have much to do before they arrive. There's more. The sailors bring tales with them. Sam gave him an odd look, and for a moment he looked as if he wanted to say something. He swallowed. They say they saw dragons fighting over Dragonstone. John felt a coldness pass right through him. But he said nothing. Do you think they will still come, my lord? Asked Sam, quietly. Who? The dragons. Maester Eamon stands in the cold each morning with his ravens and waits for them. John thought of his brother, cautious and calculating. Aegon was Rhaegar's son as he never was, silver-haired and purple-eyed and everything a Targaryen should be, cloaking what traces his Dornish mother had left within him. He thought of Daenerys, shy and quiet as a mouse, scurrying out of the way of anyone who came before her. Do as Maester Aemon says, Sam. Study your tomes and perhaps in them you will find our salvation, he said. For now, we hold the wall. The wall protects the realm, not dragons. Notes. Thank you all for your overwhelming, kind response to the previous chapter. Sometimes it takes me a few days to reply to the comments because I want to be able to sit down and give my reply as much thought as you all did when writing them, but I read them all right away and often go back to reference them. Thank you. This chapter was quite tricky to write. It's not as action-packed as the previous few chapters, but hopefully fills in the gaps in what's going on elsewhere in the story. I've consolidated much of John's ADWD arc here, but I didn't want to copy and paste huge chunks of his POV, so tried instead to reference keystone events in passing, Tormund and his people crossing, finding the wildlings beyond the wall and learning of Mother Mole, etc. Although many things play out similarly, the dynamic is rather different because of the absence of Stannis and the presence of Rhaegar, the stronger position of the North, and of course, everything going on in King's Landing. It's a bit unclimatic perhaps because with this story I've tried to think about how these big changes would diverge from canon, but I arrived to this point and I think John's core logic is sound in canon, that he would have been able to convince his uncle and father, but I don't see Rhaegar as unmovable as Stannis, with the key difference here that Rhaegar isn't a religious fanatic, that he allows mans to live and they are able to send envoys in to gather more of the free folk, particularly the Weeper's host, which in canon is getting ready to force the Bridge of Skulls. Also, Jon is able to consolidate his authority more effectively here with Rhaegar at the wall. He's the son of a ruling Targaryen king who apparently has dragons again, not dead Ned Stark's bastard dealing with a pretender to the throne. That doesn't solve all of his problems, of course, but in many ways, the Watch is much better prepared here than in canon. However, it's not going to be straightforward as the stakes are raised, and there are underlying tensions and serious problems that will become clearer and more contentious as the story progresses. Thank you once more. I hope you all enjoy the latest installment. Chapter 26, Ned 2. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The map was not the land but beyond the wall. They might as well have been stumbling with their eyes shut. The three companies had ridden together to White Ettree and camped for the night in the empty tumble-down houses beneath the massive weirwood tree that spread its pale limbs and dark red leaves across the village. Its face was a jagged hollow large enough to swallow a sheep, but not the first they had seen. Many of the trees in the woods were recently carved, some with solemn mouths, a broken branch for a nose, 2 eyes carved deep into the trunk, but others were sterner, as though the anger of the men who marked it had been torn into them. The old gods are with us, Robb had told his men as they stood before an oak with a savage, fresh face. The one-eyed ranger, Kedge Whitey, said wildlings had been at White Ettree only a year before Mormont's ranging. Where they were now, only the gods knew. South of the wall, perhaps, if Jon had his way, or dead. Or else massing elsewhere, Ned thought, readying another attack. That was up to them to learn. The Black brothers who traveled with them said this might be the Watch's last ranging before spring came. Already in Castle Black it had grown cold, the winter winds so vicious that some days that they used the maze of tunnels that the brothers called the Wormways to travel between buildings. Soon, they would have no time to shovel out the paths from one building to another, and all would move through the dark underground. They parted there, in that lonely village. Black Jack Bulwer and his men would go west, searching for signs of the wilderling they called the Weeping Man. He was not unfamiliar to Ned, a raider who troubled the mountain clans, raping and slaying their kin. He and his horde had been pushed back the Bridge of Skulls, but where they gathered now, none knew. I should have marched north long ago, Ned thought. How long had he heard tales of Mance, and done nothing? But he had thought him only one of 100 self-styled kings who came before him, another who the Starks might smash against the wall. And then the Greyjoys were upon their shores and, dragons of all sorts, and when finally Mance Rayder struck, he caught them unawares. Not quite too late, Ned remembered. Mance Rayder was defeated, his people fled, and more knights would be arriving at the wall to hold it. Robb and his men would go north, to places well trod by the Watch. Deadly places, nonetheless. The hill the wildlings called the Fist had been a ring fort of the first men in the Dawn Age. The Ranger Dewin said its heights were easy to defend and offered commanding views, its slopes precipitous to the north and west and only slightly more gentle to the east. None of that had mattered, when the dead things came in the night. Some days, Ned did not believe it. But he had heard the tale from the mouths of at least 10 black brothers, green boys and seasoned rangers both, and even the high-born lad Samwell, the son of Lord Randil Tully. Kedge Whitey had swore to it too. There, the Watch had fled, their whites had attacked, slaughtering the brothers, falling neither beneath steel nor arrows. When John returned to that place, he had said there were no corpses, only dead horses, sprawling at the base of the hills, entrails spilling out from their bellies or impaled on stakes. And there too, his nephew had found the daggers and horn wrapped in the black cloak of a sworn brother of the Night's Watch. Ned would not have his son go to that place, nor the northerners who travelled with him. They had clamoured all for what the honour of marching north, of spilling wilderling blood, but a smaller party meant they could make haste, and leave the greater part of their strength behind. We are not hunting wildlings, Ned had reminded them as they gathered in Castle Black's common hall. They were gathering information, so they might know when and if the wildlings mean to strike again. Too much of Mance Rayder's host had escaped beneath the wall. Surely, they were massing somewhere, and it was time to learn where. Robb would be well guarded, riding with the men who had fought with him at Moat Cailin and on Pike, Cleesa Wyn, Darin Hornwood, Owen Norrie, the Smallgen, and Wendell Marndaly. Ned sent with him Donal and Artos Flint of the Mountain clans, seasoned men both, and the younger Brandon Norrie. Robb would not withstand Harry on Karstark yet, his anger burned too hot and Ned knew the wound would need mending, but for now Harry on would travel with Ned, and in his place Torrhen Karstark went with Robb. King Roriger's contribution to the effort was 20 knights from houses Celtigar and Valerian, who were loath to be so far from the sea and tried hard to hide how deep the cold seeped into their bones. The Southron knights had not been so ready to volunteer for the task. They were here at the king's command, but it was a cold duty that compelled them. This was not their land but a place as foreign to them as Slavers Bay. But they were good swords all, Ned had seen enough of battle with the wildlings to know that. Robb would ride under cover of the haunted forest, not crossing to the mountains that lay to the west save in a moment of greatest need. Dewin, the old ranger who travelled with him, was a tracker unlike any other in the Watch, John said, and could lead them quickly through the woods, whether by day or night. Ned bid farewell to his son beneath White Ettree's weirwood. Robb wore brown leather boots, grey woolen pants, white gloves and a coat of silver ringmail over layers of wool and boiled leather. His cloak was thick, lined with fur, but even still, his breath steamed in the cold when he breathed, his wolf prowling at his feet. On Robb's wedding day, Ned had looked upon his son and wondered when it was that he had become a man. It had been a foolish thought, he knew now. Robb had looked the part then, but he had so frightened and worked hard to hide it, scared of his bride, of the ceremony, of the bedding most all. Before Ned stood a different man entirely, bearded and short-haired, sterner and bolder than the smiling boy he had been in Winterfell. Follow Dewin's commands, Ned said, he knows these lands far better than you. This is not the Wolf's Wood, Robb, you will find no friendly crofters here. The men who you travel with young and fleet-footed, do not rest in any place for longer than a single night. Send scouts ahead, always, and when you move, move silently. You are not here to fight. And in 2 months, you must be back in Castle Black, no matter what. Robb nodded, and scratched Grey Wind behind the ears. The animal was as large as a pony now. And trust your wolf, I always do, Rob replied. Ned placed his hand on his son's shoulder. Snowflakes were melting in the wool. He brushed them off. 2 months. Do you understand? No more. And if you must retreat, retreat. There is no shame in that. Rob knew all this, had fought and killed and survived, and on Pike had shown a mind as keen and quick as that of veterans of tens of battle, yet Ned could not help himself. Was he sending Rob to his doom, as he had done Bran? Bran. Ned had been away at war when he was lost, but Winterfell's guards had combed the Wolf's Wood for him. And the reeds. Ravens couldn't find Greywater Watch, but he'd sent a command to have riders go to Lord Howland. They would have reached the Neck by now, perhaps were riding back to Winterfell, to Cat. What would she say now to see him now, saying his goodbyes before Rob rode off to the darkest of places? She knows Rob is no longer the boy that once clung to her skirts. She knows that if he's to be Lord of Winterfell, lords and their sons must see him taking the more dangerous task himself. Even so, Cat would say he should stay in Castle Black, so he might be a part of the councils of the king and the Lord Commander. Perhaps she was right. But winter was coming, that was beyond doubt, and his son would become lord in the darkest part of the night. Rob thought it craven to remain behind, and others who gladly volunteered might think it the same. They had been months already at the wall, waiting for a foe unseen, unsure when they would strike or where, and in the meantime, holdfasts sat empty save for women, old men and babes. They could not afford to wait any longer. Either the enemy would come to the wall soon, or they would have to march out to meet them. Waiting longer meant death, not the quick death of battle but a slower, more brutal sort, a death of starvation and cold as holdfasts were buried under snow, their lords lingering at the wall, waiting for something, or nothing. Yes, I know, said Rob. Father, if Uncle Ben. Ned interrupted, do not search for your uncle. It pained him to say it, but Jeor Mormont had gone searching for him, to his death and the near decimation of the Watch. Rob and his men could not share that fate. If your uncle is alive, he will make it back to Castle Black, Ned said, more kindly. Think only of the task before you. Rob's hand went to the helm of his sword, hanging off his belt. Beside it was a sheathed knife, one of the ones Jon had found on the fist. He had given them all, everything that he had found wrapped in the black cloak, a dozen knives, leaf-shaped spearheads that the men had racked atop wooden spears, and numerous arrowheads. It was not enough for each man, but they had shared the supplies between them, each hoping in his heart they would find no use for them. Rob looked over his shoulder where his party climbed atop their mounts. 2 months, Rob said. He placed his hand over Ned's. Be careful, father. Ned smiled, I will. Go on, your men are waiting. Under the branches of the weirwood tree, under the eyes of the gods, Ned watched his son and 30 good men ride off into the great green wood before them. His path would lead him east. They would travel first in the shadow of the wall, across the edges of the forest before turning north when they reached Sable Hall. There, they would scout across the eastern part of the forest, and when they returned, it would be to Eastwatch by the sea, to aid Cotter Pike as the king's promised ships arrived with men and supplies. The day was grey, damp, and overcast, and it did not grow any brighter. Kegdi Whitey led the way, with Ned behind him, the Great Jon on one side and Harry on Karstark on the other. Lord Rickard was away, helping to garrison Stony Door, and his son was grim-faced as he rode. My son, too, by the laws of gods and man. Ned could not find anger in his heart for his daughter's husband. It was he who had commanded Harry on to keep Bran and the Reeds safe, and where was safer than the edge of the battle, hidden away where no arrow nor sword could find it. The fault lay with Ned, but Harry on bore the burden all the same, angry and ashamed both. Behind came Alyn, Jory Castle, Sir Helman Tallheart, and William Dustin. He had kept his company small as he dared, cautious of causing offence, wishing to keep as many of his men as he could on the wall where they could help garrison the keeps and speak for their people before the king. They had clamoured to come, with vows and boasts, and he had decided on 6, 8 in all. Around them, the haunted forest stood as it was in the Dawn Age, dark and silent. In some places, it was allowed to come no closer than half a mile of the north face of the wall, but Ned had learned much of the state of the Watch, and knew in some places it was not tended to, allowed to grow wild and to take root in the shadow of the wall itself. There had been a sort of hope when Rhaegar first became king over his bleeding kingdom, not in the north perhaps but among the Watch, where he had sent men and supplies, and promised more, promised to restore it to its former strength. But the king's eyes had turned elsewhere, and if he regretted his inattention now, he showed little sign of it. They rode for a day across the broad swath of open ground between the realms of man and the forest, under the eyes of whatever brothers walked the wall that day, but when day turned to night, Kedge Whitey had them turn at last into the woods. Ned had ridden in the haunted forest before, chasing after wildlings who hid there after the Mance Raiders' host was smashed, but the woods had been filled with sound then. Today, it was deathly silent, save for the breaths of the men and their horses, and the crunching of the snow beneath their feet. 10 yards into the wood and moonlight fought to penetrate the ancient tangle of root and thorn and grasping limb. "Ride close, Lord Kedge Whitey commanded. "I'll have no one lighting torches here, not till we know what's in these woods with us." "As you say." They rode slower now, careful in the dark, their horses so close that each man could reach out and touch the one beside him, picking their way carefully, groping for solid footing on the uneven ground. It was thus for most of their journey, a dreary, cold silence, where they made their way across this land where the trees rules and the woods around them went on as far as the eye could see. Sometimes in the nights it was only the moon that guided them, now and then a patch of stars. The world was black and white and still. It was a long, slow, endless trek. The snow clung to their boots and breeches, and the wind rattled the pines and made their cloaks snap and swirl around them. Where the wildlings had gone to, there was no trace. Each night when they stopped their march, Ned sketched out their movements on a piece of parchment, marking where they found remains of small houses, deserted or burned, where traces of carts, broken down and snowed over, sat broken at the bottom of hills. They reached the Antler River after a month of hard riding. Kedge led their company up a steep, stony path hidden within the woods. It was a treacherous route, where more than once the trees seemed to close as though to trap them until the ranger slid behind a tree, and the world opened up before them once more. It was in this way that they came across the river from where they could not be seen, concealed within the forested hills so they looked down on it from above. It was a great water, blue-white, and rushed across the frozen shores. The forest thinned only slightly north of the river, and where its water flowed into the sea Ned spied some broken, wooden boats. "Curse these wildlings!" The Great Jon frowned. "They've led us on a merry chase. All this way and at the end of it naught but some half-rotted boats. They've crashed on 2 umberlands by now, I'd wager. Send one of the ravens to Last Hearth, Ned, let us warn my uncles." Ned looked closed. "No, Jon." He saw moss on the wood, and places where it had been eaten away by the wind. They had been here for a year, or more, saved only by the frost. Whoever's hands made these boats is long gone. They were small and sad things, poorly made. It would have been a miracle if they'd made it through the bay, much less to the shores of the north. They turned back after that, made for the south, choosing another path that Kedge found them, riding over new rocks and through new trees, all the while the sky above them brooded as a storm gathered. It was a cold dark day when Alyn and Jory Castle rode before them as outriders. When they returned, they motioned for their party to halt. "Wildlings ahead, my lord," Alyn said, in his small voice. 5 women. "Guards?" "None," Jory replied. There were 8 all. 8 against 5. "The wildlings have spearwives among them, lord, vicious women who can tear apart a man as easily as a wild beast," Kedge Whitey said. Ned nodded. He had seen them fight. "Form a crescent." "Ride slowly and close in on them," Ned replied. Better still to leave their horses behind so the wildlings would not hear the crunch of the hooves on the ground, but he was loath to separate their party here, where the snow fell deeply around them. Storms beyond the wall came on quickly, and he would not have his men lost in this white, cold world. They moved as one. The sky above them was a faded grey of an old cloak that had been washed too many times, and though it was morning the sun was a sorry thing, hidden away so the color seemed leached out of the world. Ahead, he glimpsed a sad fire, burning slow and smoky, and between the trees came murmurs and whispers. Ned pulled ice from his sheath. His men did the same. For half a moment, none seemed to notice him when he rode forward. They were 5, as Alyn said, not women but girls, no older than Arya, dirty and huddled together, one of them either dead or sleeping by the fire. And then they were on their feet, quick as shadow cats, and the oldest among them stepped forward and pulled a small knife from her belt. "Don't come any closer," she shrieked. Her hair was a brown rat's nest, as ratted as her clothes, the furs and hides that draped her falling apart. "I'll gut you." The Great Jon snorted. Ned sheathed ice. "We mean you no harm," he said. "Get away!" A second girl shouted. They were 20 feet away, and looked skinny enough as to collapse. Nonetheless, Ned motioned to Harry-on and Kedge, and they kept their swords well in hand when he slid off his garron. He lifted 2 hands up, to show them he was unarmed. "We mean you no harm," Ned repeated. "Where is the rest of your company?" "He's a crow," a third said, the one who had been sleeping. Her face was dirty, and there were pale marks where her tears had fallen. "No, Kedge is the only brother of the Night's Watch here, and he won't harm you either. We come from the lands south of the wall." "He's a lying crow," the eldest said. They could not linger here. The children had no guards, but perhaps they were traveling to join with another party, or one was traveling to come to them. And they had made enough noise as to waken any careful ears in the woods. "Are you hungry, girl?" Harry-on called from atop his horse. He dismounted, and reached into his pack for his apple. Each man had traveled only with what he could carry, so they would not have to drag their provisions after them. "I'll give you this and more, if you tell us where your company is." The eldest hesitated. Her eyes were on the fruit, and the other children huddled closer around her. "Give us the apple first," she bargained. "One for each of us." "Give us the answer first," Harry-on said. "And put away that knife." There was little chance of that. She gripped it harder. "Swear you will leave us be," after the girl said, eyes flitting to each man. "Swear it." "We swear," Ned said. "And give us an apple." He motioned to Harry-on, and Harry-on threw it. The girl caught it ably, smelled it and passed it to the youngest, who did the same before biting into it. She ate it with a desperation Ned had never seen before, a hunger that belied weeks of little to no food, not mere days. "There's no company. It's only us," the girl said, and she seemed angry and frightened both by her own admission. "Where did you come from?" asked Ned. The girl waited for Harry-on to throw them another apple before she replied. "This one too," she passed to another in her charge. "From north." Ned frowned. "No, where are your kin? Did you travel with Mance Rayder's host?" Harry-on threw the third apple. "Caught," the girl replied. "They're dead. All dead. You crows wouldn't let us cross, and we ran to the woods and we starved. Mother Mole said she would save us." Mother Mole. The wildlings took strange names, but Ned had not heard this one. He looked over at Kedge, who shook his head. "This Mother Mole. Where is she now?" The fourth apple was given to her. She passed it off, and pointed east. "In the caves." "Hardam," Kedge offered quietly. "Hardam." To hear old Nan tell it, it was an accursed place, haunted by ghouls and demons, where the waters were choked with swollen corpses and shrieks echoes from the cave mouths. How many travel with her? The final apple. The girl caught this one and kept it for herself, hugging it close to her body. Thousands. They would have no more out of her, he knew. Her mouth had been pressed into a thin line, and she watched them with hard eyes, eyes that had seen too much. "Thank you, my lady," Ned said. He turned to Harry-on, "Leave them some of the flat bread and dried meat, and a skin of water so they do not have to go searching." The girls watched silently as Harry-on laid out the food. To the pile, Ned added a blanket from his own pack. They could spare it, he decided. They had packed more than they needed, and eaten lightly, and 1 or 2 meals for 5 small mouths cost them little. As he turned to mount his horse, the girl spoke. "Don't go there," she said. Something dark had crept into her tone. "What do you mean, girl?" Kedge asked, from atop his horse. "Don't go further into the woods." "Why? What will we find there?" "Your brothers and fathers." The Great Jon called out. The girl shook her head. "No. Only the dead things." They left them there, huddled together, reaching hurriedly for the food. Lord Kedge said, as they rode away, "It was a folly to let the wildlings go. They may be going to find their kin as we speak and spilling the tale of the Black Brothers they came upon in the forest. We cannot travel with captives. I agree, my lord. Ned understood his meaning, and frowned. I will not see them killed. They went on in silence after that as Kedge led them in circles around themselves in the forest, destroying their tracks and confusing their scent in case any followed them. Only when they were in the place where they would make camp for the night, a small clearing where they could sleep before the starry sky, did they speak once more. There, Alyn and Sir Helman Tallheart took the first watch. It was too dangerous to light a fire, and so they sat closely together, huddled against the cold. What do you make of her words, Kedge? Ned asked. The black brother rubbed his gloved hands together for warmth. The wildlings are a tricky bunch, lying comes to them as easily as breathing. But if she speaks the truth and they've turned to Hardham, the Lord Commander will know soon enough. Cotter Pike watches those shores. What do you know of the place? There's no shelter saves the caves. Cotter calls him the Screaming Caves. Kedge grinned. The wild rules in Hardham, and the wildlings don't have skill to make ships big enough to sail across the sea, even if they mean to only make it as far as the Bay o' Seals. Unless they mean to travel on foot and besiege Eastwatch by the sea. True enough. They'll be a poor army by the time they arrive. They had been a poor army even at the height of their strength, driven forward only by their sheer numbers and Mance Rayder's will. Jon travelled with their host, told of how they had been undisciplined. In the snake that was their line of march, fierce warriors had marched, but a third were grouped at either end of the column and another third were with Mance Rayder, guarding the supplies and provisions. The rest were divided across the chieftains, and served as outriders, for wages and whips. Only 1 in 100 had been mounted, and they carried 10 times as many wooden clubs and spears as steel and axe. The forest was cleared of any game, and there would only be fish to be found in the shivering sea, if the waters were calm enough or wildlings skilled enough to catch them. They would eat through what little provisions they had in Hardham, and when they marched they would starve before reaching Eastwatch. Something else prodded at Ned. The dead things. Ned tasted the word on his tongue. The girl said they're in the woods. If they assailed them at Hardham, it would explain why they were running. We would have come across more wildlings then, wouldn't we? Harry-on asked. Unless they're all dead already and VE turned into whites, said Kedge. That's what we've come here to learn, isn't it? The Great Jon said. I say we keep marching. We ought to see these things for ourselves, learn once and for all if it's true. Could be some sickness got the wildlings, in which case that nephew of yours ought to block the gates before more get through, Ned. William Dustin frowned. His was not a face for dark looks, but small smiles and patient words. Once the gates are blocked, they will be closed until summer, perhaps forever. If there is some illness, it would track the healthy together with the sick, and when the gates are opened again, we will face down not thousands, but hundreds of thousands. This is no sickness. I've told you what I've seen, Lord Stark, and I'll swear it again. It was not no plague that was upon them, they were dead, Kedge said, gloomily. I saw them kill my brothers on the fist. It smelled of cold, first, then death, and then they came, animals and human. Arrows didn't stop them, neither did steel. Only the fire made any difference at all, and only just. The free folk are no different from us, Jon had said, when they'd spoken after the battle. They have neither laws nor lords, but they have nowhere to go and they can fight with us against our common foe. It had taken Ned time to see that. They had fought against monstrous things in the shadow of the wall, freakish creatures that only vaguely resembled men and beasts from nightmares. But in the days after, the wildlings that drifted to the wall were ragged and half-starved, hungry, frightened, and numb. For every warrior there were 10 women and children, dragging their elderly with them. They carried almost nothing, neither weapons nor provisions. Nothing at all sometimes, save the corpses of their babes that were thrown into the fires. Ned would not see them slaughtered, nor would he have them pushed back beyond the wall. They would only come back, and each attempt would grow more desperate, more deadly. Jon had the way of it. They would have to make peace with these people. But it had not made the choice any easier to bear, nor did it silence the doubts in his heart. But it was done. Even now, the wildlings were filling the castles on the wall. Those castles belonged to the Watch, beyond the domain of the North, but Ned wondered what Jon would have done if he was not nephew to Lord of Winterfell, son of the king. He wondered what Benjen would say, if he were alive. It is done, Ned told himself again. And the fate of the North hung with it. The trees stood before them, warriors armored in bark and leaf, deployed in their silent ranks awaiting the command to storm the hill. Black, they seemed. It was only when the moonlight brushed against them that Ned glimpsed a flash of green. Faintly, he heard the sound of water flowing over rocks. Ned looked at Harry on cleaning his sword. The man was older than Rob, but the signs of youth still clung to his face, though he tried to hide it beneath his heavy beard. He had been married to Sansa so briefly before war began, she'd had no chance to give him a son yet. He thought of Last Hearth, Torrens Square, Barrowton, and the Dread Fort, of the harvests that had gone to seed for want of arms to swing the scythes, and the villages which were emptying even now as the small folk went to escape winter within their lord's castle. Even in the dreary, cold silence through which they had ridden, they had learned much. The eastern edge of the haunted forest was free of wildlings, there was no game to be found for leagues and their villages were abandoned. If an attack came, it would come from Hardham, if the girl's words were true, and even then, even if thousands of wildlings were to march on the wall, they travelled with children, women, and the old. The girls were proof enough of that. And they would be starving, or nearing death. Send a raven to Castle Black, Ned told Kedge. Tell them the eastern forests are empty, the wildlings have fled, and there are rumours of a horde at Hardham and White's in the woods. Tell them we're marching to Eastwatch. I'll send the raven, but I can't read nor write, Kedge said, without shame. I'll write it, then. William Dustin shifted beside him, and looked uneasy. You mean for us to go back, Ned? I say we march, the Great Jon repeated, unhappily. We've come all this way, what's a few leagues more? No, we leave, Ned said, frowning. Jeor Mormont set out from Castle Black with 300 men. 50 survived the fist, and only a dozen returned to the wall. We have risked enough. Cotter Pike's galleys will learn the truth of Hardham, and see more than we can on our mounts. If there are whites or wildlings on those shores, we stand little chance against either. It was colder even in the morning. They rode 2 miles south, making their path in between thick sentinels and a carpet of roots that seemed untrod by man nor beast, before cutting across a tangle of brush and veering southeast. A crust of snow covered the ground, but tracks left behind by their horses' hooves were quickly covered as the snow fell around them. It seemed to be falling faster with each hour, the drifts growing deeper, and the men pressed on, their beards crusted with ice. They marched thus for half a day until a storm came from the west, sending snowflakes swirling around them, grey and white whirling together, and as the wind picked up, it drove the snow with it. They became a column of snowmen, riding through knee-high drifts. His men were at home in the snow, but even still, the wind became a lash as cruel as any slaver's whip, and by evening they had begun to drift eastwards, to where the tree cover was heavier, where they could shelter between oak trees big enough to hide all 8 of them in its roots, a reprieve from the wind, if not the snow, which weighed down even the heaviest branches. On the second day, they struggled once more to force their way against the wind. Their garrons were sure-footed, and they had plenty of provisions, but they were as good as blind in the storm. They ended their march early, and passed the day resting their feet, and their mounts. Ned's men were hale and healthy, making japes and telling tales as though they were sat together by a hearth drinking ale, not here in this white world of snow and silence. He wondered how the Southron swords who travelled with Rob fared. It had been 7 weeks to the day since they parted at White Ettree. Perhaps they were back in Castle Black by now. By the 3rd day, the winds had calmed. Kedge left alone to scout at dawn, and returned in the last light of the day, frowning. Just as I thought. The cursed storm pushed us too far east. We're a day away from the edge of the forest. Ned remembered the maps. The woods cleared then, and the ground shifted into the rocky peninsula that led to Hardham at the tip. It did not snow the next day, but they rode slowly nonetheless, through uneven ground where the snow reached their horses' knees and hocks. The world grew darker around them, and by noon it was dark as dusk, as though the sky itself was brooding. Jeor Mormont's ranging had been guided by the red comet. For theirs, there was only darkness, only a great canopy painted in 1,000 shades of white, with here and there a patch of green or red where a weirwood shouldered through the pines and sentinels. It was 6 hours before Kedge called for a halt. The Black Brother dismounted and motioned for Ned to come forward. Tracks. 100 or 1,000, as though a great big army had been marching through the woods. They were coming in their direction, and ended abruptly, as though they had vanished into thin air. Ned knelt. Some of them were old, covered over by a thin layer of frost that he only had to brush aside to reveal. Most were the tracks of men, heavy and large, trampling the ground beneath them, but there were others too, the places where the snow was rutted by what might have been carts. There is something else here, Ned realized. There were the markings of bare feet, small enough they might have been those of children, others large as his own. If man or child wandered barefoot here, they would be long dead. Ned stood slowly, and drew ice. He heard his men doing the same, and saw Kedge pull out his axe. The ranger looked at him through the drifting snow, and there was anger and fear both on his face. "Is it them?" Ned mouthed. Kedge nodded silently. Slowly, they walked back to their mounts, and every footstep seemed as loud as a scream. "Stay together. I'll ride in the front, the Great Yon will take the rear," Ned called out. Whatever lurked in these woods had already found them. "Ride down anything that comes across your path, do not stop until you have reached the wall." Ned looked at them once more, grim-faced all, and with Kedge at his side kicked his horse into motion. They rode wildly, trusting their garrons over the snowy ground, over roots and branches and frost, keeping their balance as they hurriedly made south. Ahead, loomed the endless forest, one path out of 100 before them, but it was the one that would bring them to the wall. South was life, everywhere else death. When the mob came, it came from the west. Harry On saw them first, and cried out a warning, and by the time Ned turned his head there were men moving towards them. No, not men. Gods be good. Corpses, with eyes like blue stars. Some scrambled forward with arms missing, others lurched with pale dead faces, crawling from behind the trees like ants across a hard ground. Most of them were naked, wildlings, men, women and children, all dead, yet undead. William Dustin was the first to strike one down. A wight wearing tattered hides reached for his saddle, and Lord Dustin slashed at it, taking off half his face. When it fell to the ground, it did not rest, but tried to grab onto the Great Yon's horse as it trampled over it. The Great Yon took off its arms with his great sword. "Take off their hands!" Ned yelled. The wights were slow, and clumsy, but there were too many pushing forward. They could not kill them. They would keep coming. But it would keep them from clutching at their swords and stirrups and the legs of their horses. Something thudded against Ned's horse. One of the dead things scrambled for purchase against his pack, tried to draw itself up. His garron whinnied loudly, and it was all he could do to keep his mount's balance, and his. Ned lifted ice and slashed it, cutting away its shoulder, and as it fell, he saw in horror it was no man. It was a girl, no older than Arya. A dead girl, a starving child in the woods. "It's dead!" Jory called out from further down the line. "Ice! Ice! It's dead!" Ned looked back. The wight had not risen, but lay in a twisted pile on the ground, where other dead things scrambled over it. They plunged through the forest at a gallop, through clutching black hands and burning blue eyes and blowing snow, and each wight that ice touched died a second death. The others, however, kept coming at them, groping in the darkness even with their heads cut off, even with their legs torn out from underneath them. Hellman Tallheart lost his sword in a wight's chest. He was too slow to pull it out, and the wight clawed at it, pulled itself up and drove it deeper into its chest until it clung to Hellman's sleeve, and pulled him off his mount. Hellman came down in a tangle of steel, leather, and screaming horse flesh, and then the other wights were swarming over him and the men who rode behind him had to jump their horses over them. Jory called out and Harry on Karstark shouted, but there was nothing they could do now, for the master of Torrens Square, blood of the first men, loyal and sure, and the father of the boy who called Robb Stark friend. Ned smashed a wight in the face with all the weight of his sword and charging horse, taking off his head, and then another, and another, as the sounds of battle filled the haunted forest. "They are forcing us east," he realized too late. They were coming from all around, but the mass of their strength was bearing on them from the west, and they drifted further and further until they would find themselves beyond the forest, the cliffs and the sea on the left side of them, trapped. The one-eyed ranger seemed to realize it at the same time. Kedge held his reins with his sword hand, and with the other reached within his furs and pulled out a horn. He blew it thrice. Robb, Ned thought suddenly. They should not be here, not anywhere near this place, but if he heard, Would he come or flee? Flee, Ned hoped, flee. Out of the corner of his eye, Ned saw a huge pale shape running with them in the trees. One blink and it was upon them, a bear with blue-eyed, its guts spilling out like 100 snakes. Kedge, Ned, Jory, and Alan crossed before it came crashing through the trees, but it caught Harry On's Carstark horse, pulling the Garon's leg out from under it. They crashed to the ground, and the other Northerners were upon them, William Dustin and the Great Yon, hacking away at it mercilessly. No. They could not stop. If they stopped, they would die. All the while, the Whites continued their barrage. A woman wearing nothing but a cloak, grabbed Lord Dustin's foot. He turned to strike at it, and all the while the bear crawled on, moving to where Harry On and his horse lay on the ground. Go, Kedge, go to higher ground, Ned shouted. He turned his horse back, trampling over the maimed or dead again Whites they had sliced through, and rode down the bear, slashing it from shoulder to backside. When he looked back, Kedge, Jory, and Alan were gone, and the path through which they had ridden filled with Whites. Go! He shouted to the Great Yon and William Dustin. They had a chance, if they moved quickly. Go, again when they made no move, and reached his hand out to Harry On. Carstark was dazed from the fall, and moving too slowly. Come on, boy! The Great Yon bellowed. He jumped from his saddle, planted his feet in the ground before Harry On, and he drew his axe in one hand and his sword in the other. This is it, Ned thought numbly. They were overrun. Here, they would make their stand and they would die, and rise again as demons, until the day the king's dragons came. The dragons would burn them all, and give them their true death. The thought of that made his mouth twist. What his father say to see him now, what would Brandon? Ned jumped from his horse, ice in hand. Please, he prayed silently, watch over my son. Bring him and his men to Castle Black safely. A White crawled towards him, something that had once been a boy that now slid on its belly like a snake, its legs mangled. Ned took off his head. Please, let Kedge and the others reach the wall. Let the wall hold strong, and keep these creatures from going south. South. The mountain clans would succumb first, then last Hearth, Carhold, the Dread Fort and Winterfell. Winterfell. He thought of Cat, grieving for Bran, and it was like ice through his heat. Cat. He thought of Sansa, and the husband she hardly knew, and the children by him she would never have. He thought of Arya, practicing at sword fighting with Bran, both thinking no one knew. He thought of Rickon, wild and mischievous, and his first grandson, the little babe who looked so much like Robb, and was born into a world darker than they all knew. And Lyanna. He should have made her come back to Winterfell. She's the last of us. William Dustin jumped from his great stallion as Harry On made it to his feet, holding his sword in both hands. They gave their back to the trunk of a tall ash. Ned's horse ran off into the wild, as did William Dustin's, but the Great Yons fell to the Whites with a terrible shriek, its belly ripped open with their hands. Ned looked at them. There were only 4, and before them were perhaps thousands. It was the end of the day, or perhaps the end of the world. Courage. He said, courage. Fight, and die, and take as many of them with you as you can. The Great Yon's face turned into something that might have been a grin, or a growl. Stark. The Great Yon bellowed out. Winterfell. Winterfell. The men added their voice to his, and made their swords sing, shearing off limbs, cracking heads, tearing chests asunder. The wind set the leaves to rustling, and Ned thought he heard muffled footfalls behind him. The dead things have come from all sides. They pressed back, closer to the tree, and the world seemed to sigh around them. Its last breath and ours, Ned thought. But no, he was wrong on that count too. It was arrows, arrows coming from behind them, and the night erupted with fire. One arrow caught a White in its chest as it grabbed at the Great Yon's axe. Its tattered rags were aflame, and when Great Yon kicked it off, it landed against another, and the fire caught in its rotted hides. And then men or monsters were bounding through the trees behind them, with faces painted blue, green and purple and teeth filed into fangs. They beat the Whites back with torches, and the fastest among them reached for the packs of their dead horses, and stripped them with able hands. Run! One of the wildlings shouted. Retreat, shouted another. Run! Ned repeated. He grabbed Harry on by his shoulders and pushed him ahead, running east in the direction the wildlings had come from. The men who had saved them were on their side, and with them others, warriors all, big men carrying torches and fierce women with spears, some riding horses, others elks, but most barefoot, running swift across the snow with bare paws, shoes made with bent wood and leather strips that allowed them to walk on the snow without breaking through the crust. Ned and his men were not so lucky. The drifts were deeper here and they stumbled as much as they walked. Too slow, Ned cursed. The fire had only beaten the whites back temporarily, but it did not kill them. They would press on, and fall upon them in the snow. But what could they do, save march? They put one step before the other, and pushed their way through. Beneath the snow were rocks and the roots of trees, deep holes where some animal perhaps had made its burrow in the spring. Ned saw a wildling fall and get lifted up by his kin, dragged along with them cursing until they could find a horse to put him on. No one could get left behind. It meant death, and death meant the whites and another enemy to strike down. Ned thought of Sir Helman Tallheart as the snow swirled down around him. Steel does not work against them, Ned remembered, only fire. And ice. They were running away, retreating, but he carried ice. Ned turned. He should be with the rearguard. Someone gripped him and pushed him forward. Ned, someone shouted. Snow covered his head, sat on his shoulders and over his cloak, and a scarf covered his mouth. All he could see was grey eyes. Ned, keep moving. We can't fight them now. Benjen. His little brother was here with him, at the end of all the things. No. Another mistake. Benjen was dead. And then voices called, loose, 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 screaming in the night. More fire arrows were sent over their heads, and the man was gone. A ghost. How long have we been running? They were beyond the trees now, crossing through the forested hillside into a plain of snow. The air was colder here, the sky as white as the ground before them, and somewhere far away, Ned could hear the sounds of the sea. They went on in the snow, blind, following the wildlings. William Dustin, the Great Jon, and Harry on put away their swords and carried torches instead. The going was easier here. Their ankles free of the snow, with the strength that remained to them, they could run across the desolate icy fields. As they did, the storm seemed to melt away around them and Ned could see their foes had fallen back, vanishing back into the woods. He could see clearly now the men who had saved them, no more than 40, wielding torches and carrying their bows and arrows slung over their backs. Some had painted faces, others walked on bare feet that were hard and black as boiled leather, but for the most part they were men like another other, with hard eyes that had seen terrors uncounted. Before them, lay hell. They descended down a rocky gorge, seamed and fissured in every direction with streams of hot water. It smelled of death, of sulfur, as jets of hissing steam burst from the sides. The soil beneath their feet seemed to quake as though it were preparing to open up and swallow them, and as their boots sunk into the dark mud. No, not dark. Black. There were deep caves cut into the cliffside, where thousands were huddled, crowded over fires that let out a foul, black smoke. And they screamed. It was a deafening, screeching sound, like the voice of 1,000 demons. It is not the wildlings, not this starving, thin mass. It's the caves themselves. Keep your sword close, a voice came from beside him. Ben. It was him, not a spirit nor shadow, but his brother, thinner than he'd ever seen him, with gaunt, hollow cheeks and a wind-scoured face that made him look twice his age. He was not wearing black, but old furs of grey and white and brown. Ben, he repeated, breathless. He grabbed his brother's arm. It was flesh and blood, warm, not mist, not cold. What is this place? Benjen Stark pulled the scarf back over his face. Hardham. Notes. Thank you everyone for your comments on the previous chapters. I've been really grateful for your readership and your interactions with my writing. I know people often say that writing fanfic is time-consuming and writers produce and share it for free, and while it's true, I think something similar could be said for readers who follow a story over a long period of time and take time out of their day to share their thoughts with the writers. All that said, I'm incredibly appreciative to anyone who takes the time to read this and is still hanging in there with me until the end, particularly given how long of a hiatus I took. I read a lot of meta on how Ned might have handled the situation at the wall if he had lived long enough. I'll add links here later when I have the time to go hunt them down again, and in the end, I was most convinced by the speculation that he would come to see the humanity of the wildlings and the need to save them, both strategically and morally. I don't think he's willing to go as far as Jon, certainly not when it comes to raiders or commanders like the Weeper, Mance, or Tormund, but I think his thoughts on those who deemed to be innocents would tend on the side of mercy. At least for the moment, however, it doesn't seem like he'll be in the room to make those decisions. There is still so much material to get through at the wall, but I'm hoping for the next chapter we'll be back with Dany and Aegon for a bit and get the storylines in the south moving. Thank you again for reading. Chapter 27, Daenerys 11. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Dany did not know when her nephew landed on Dragonstone, or how long she lay pinned beneath Brightson, her head throbbing from the impact with the ground, sweating dripped in rivets down her face as the heat of him clung to her skin. She knew he was there only from the sound of his voice. No. No. To me. He shouted. Over here. Brightson turned his head slowly to the noise. Brightson. Here. Here. Her nephew was yelling. She heard the crack of a whip, and the dragon was moving away from her, towards the sound. As he did, Dany rolled from beneath him, scrabbling awkwardly at the bed of black rocks beneath her. Where was her whip? She searched the ground with her hands, desperately throwing the smaller stones out of the way, scrambling on all fours like a beast. Red, red. His eyes were red. Dany could not think of what that meant, nor had she seen when they were turned. Was it as she rode, or when they landed? She had ridden Shadowtamer 100 times at least, and his eyes had remained molten. No Targaryen has ever had more than one mount while their first dragon lived. Perhaps the danger was not to the rider, but the dragon. Behind her, there was a great crack of Brightson snapping his teeth. She gave up her search for her whip and looked at last back towards what had been Dragonstone's gates and the path that had led down Great Mountainside to the ports and villages. Her nephew stood, armored in a shirt of overlapping rows of black discs that glittered like dragon scales as he stood, wielding nothing but his whip and sea flame beside him, as Brightson rounded around on both dragon and man. She searched the sky for Shadowtamer. The black dragon hung from a half-destroyed tower that leaned precariously to one side, watching over them as he had in his old life. With him, perched here and there on the edifice, sat the crows, screaming and flying this way and that, settling down only to fly up once more, cawing at each other, flapping, and filling the air with feathers. What is happening? What had she done? Aegon. Her nephew knew better. If he hesitated, if he ran, Brightson would burn and devour him. His eyes were wide as plates as he looked from her to the dragons, and back again, every muscle tense. Purple eyes, Rhaegar's eyes. Fly. As she screamed, so did Brightson, roaring full in Aegon's face. The force of it sent him tumbling backwards, falling flush on his back on the ground, his whip slipping from his hand. Dany lurched forward but Sea Flame was faster, putting himself between Aegon and his brother, answering Brightson's roar with his own. The dragons danced around each other, like two bravos swaggering and fingering their sword hilts, preparing for their death duel. Sea Flame snapped first, and when he did, fire flew from his open jaws, bright and hot. Brightson's retort was a burst of flame, and when his tail lashed sideways, Dany darted out of the way. The heat was upon her, like the blast from an oven. She could not see her nephew. The dragons blocked her vision, and his armor, black as the midnight sea, made it so he was well hidden within the wreckage of Dragonstone. If her feet carried her quickly, perhaps she could scramble across the great expanse that had become her dragon's battlefield, and risk her own death. They were hissing at one another, snapping and spurting flame, and the ground beneath them was uneven and rocky, and too warm now. Dany could feel the heat it through her boots. Dany turned to Shadowtamer. He watched them still. She could scramble up and mount him, and bring the dragons to heel as she had before. But it had been a close thing, too terrible, and she had risked so much even when it was Brightson alone. But Sea Flame had a rider, and if the two dragons turned on her, she did not know if Shadowtamer could force his will upon them both. Fly. Dany shouted to her dragon instead. Her nephew had been too slow to obey, But Shadow Tamer could do it, and where he went, his brothers might follow. The black dragon stared at her for a beat too long, as was his way, as though, like a disobedient child, he wished her to know that he could choose to disregard her commands should the mood strike him. And then he launched himself into the sky, sending the crows off their perches when he flapped his wings. The birds responded with every louder screams, and jumped over one another to reclaim their places. And Shadow Tamer was in the sky above them, and his shadow swept over them, blacker than any passing cloud. He roared, and the sound he made was enough to put his brother's effort to shame. It echoed off the sheer black cliffs of the Dragonman's eastern flanks, shook the stones beneath her feet, and for a moment, she waited for the world itself to cleave in two. It had a maddening effect on his brothers. Sea Flame and Brightson snapped at one another and were at once a tangle of wings and claws. Dany heard herself scream, and then they were in the air together, robed in fire and smoke. As they fought, Dany ran to her nephew. The dragons had left steam in their wake, wisping across the ground like ghostly sentinels. Dany moved through it, like a blind man groping his way down an unfamiliar hall. Aegon lay in the spot she had seen him fall, nestled among the stone. His hand lay limply across his sword, still in its scabbard at his hip, and with his other, he covered his face. Aegon. Somewhere, she heard a cry. It was not her own, but the familiar sound of animals crying as they were hunted down, echoing and ringing off the isle. Shadow Tamer had found prey. Roughly, she shook him by the shoulders. If I have killed him, I will never leave this place. She would become some savage, solitary thing, moon-mad, roaming the living hell of Dragonstone as so many other ghosts did. Bare your breast and know that I love you best of all that is in this world. She had killed her mother coming into the world, had killed her father when her torch touched his funeral pyre, watched as Viserys was bathed in dragon fire. Now Aegon, and after him, Rhaenys and Rhaegar. After them her son. Was that the price she must pay? For what? Her dragons were for the long night, the king told her. But what would it matter then, she wondered numbly. He groaned. Aegon. Aegon. He moved his hand from his face. Blood blisters had sprouted across his skin, big as roaches from the heat of Brightson's roar. Are they gone? His voice was low and weak, and his lips cracked and bled. No, their wings were beating above them, and their roars made a grotesque music. Call to Sea Flame. Slowly, he opened his eyes. His right eyebrow had swelled with blood, but his eyes were whole. Help me up. Gently, or not at all. Dany leaned towards him and waited for him to wrap his arms around her so she might pull him. Once he was seated, he turned his eyes to the sky. Enough, he said feebly, through broken lips. Enough, louder, enough, said the Prince of Dragonstone, in the voice of a king, and Sea Flame wrung himself out from his brother's grasp. Go. Go hunt. Go to hell. He beat his wings, and as he broke away, Brightson roared out his displeasure. Dany touched her nephew's back. There were no cuts, no breaks in the armor, or tears to the leather underneath. He was dazed, but alive. My face, he murmured. When he brought his hands up to cup his face, Dany gently pulled them away. Did they burn me? Did we die? You're alive. Your face, it's only from the heat. It will heal. And you? Dany touched the back of her head, and flinched at the sting. Her hair was caked with blood. I'm not dead either. Rhaegar had taught her that the bond between a dragon and dragon rider ran so deep that the beasts shared their master's loves and hates. Perhaps they knew their master's hearts too. Aegon's voice had calmed Sea Flame, somehow, and his fight with Brightson had become like hundreds before, a tiff of snips and hisses. Without riders, with no one urging them on with whips and commands, the dragons were not like to kill one another. Even still, as they pulled apart now, Dany could see burning wounds on each, but for each that Brightson had given, Sea Flame had returned twofold. Even now, Sea Flame did not go far, neither to hunt nor to hell as Aegon had commanded. He settled close to them, perched on a crop of rocks, coiled into a ball, wings and tail tucked right, but his eyes watched his rider. Brightson too, defeated twice, came to the ground. He would not come so close, even now. Instead, he perched as Shadow Tamer had before, in the half-fallen Tower of Crows. You need to see a maester. His blisters were weeping white and red pus. Can you fly? I can get you in the saddle. If you just hold on, Sea Flame will take you to King's Landing. But Egon wasn't looking at her. Daenerys. She followed his gaze. Brightson's eyes were red once more. They soaked through the steaming fog like candlelight. The world felt somehow muted and far away, as though she was viewing at it through a veil. If she looked hard, she saw blue, green, a spark of sunlight on the horizon. But all else was grey. Far away, the water raged and beat the cliffs till they were near enough to crumble, and ate away at the posts of the docks that had once been filled with ships and now lay abandoned. But even that was a distant, vague thing. Before her, all was wrapped in forever, fog and fog, settling into her hair and on her skin, warm as dragon fire. Daenerys. A voice came from the dark world around them. Quaithe, she thought first. Did you hear that? Egon asked. Yes. Daenerys. The voice came again. Not that of a woman, but of a man. Egon's hand was back on his sword hilt, and slowly he drew his blade. He pulled himself up, muffling a groan, and crouched on the balls of his feet. There's no one there. It's sorcery. She moved to rise, but Egon roughly pulled her behind him. Listen, whispered the prince. A faint wind sighed through the stones, and it seemed that with it the spirit of darkness itself moved. Daenerys Targaryen, the voice said again, a whisper and a moan, the voice of a ghost. Long have I waited for you. The crows squawked horribly at that, screaming and screeching, and for a moment, not knowing why, she felt certain that within them was something human. Who are you? Are you friend or foe? She asked. Egon cursed through his teeth, and clamped his free hand across her mouth. Slowly, he drew her up with him, and once they were standing, pulled them both backwards, step by careful step, until their backs pressed against Sea Flame's scales. The dragons were not frightened. Either they did not see what they did, or they knew somehow that whatever lingered in the shadows could not lay its hand on them, could not touch their blood and bone and marrow, and if it did that they might easily shake it off as a dog might shake off the rain from its fur. Daenerys Stormborn, came the voice once more. Long have I waited for you, and now, the world shrivels and turns cold, and in its center thrives only a single black seed. Egon motioned to her with his eyes, silently pointing at the saddle and chains that coiled around his dragon. When Daenerys reached for them, they melted away before her, as swiftly as summer snow. And then Sea Flame was gone, not into ash and dust but without a trace at all. In the space where he had been, black vines spread across the stones, creeping as steadily as worms. It was day no longer, but night, an immense night, a black night that weighed starlessly over their heads. Before them, Brightson was gone. Only the crows remained, sat still on that same tower, growing too with those black, dead weeds. Egon's breath steamed. He held the sword in his hand, taut as a bowstring. Don't be scared, a voice came from nowhere. We only want to help you. A different voice. A child's voice. His words were like clouds, muffling the moon, shifting this way and that with the wind. The steaming fog had turned in a cold mist that closed in. The world around them was dark with white, sluggish and wet, and it seemed to her that if she left her nephew's side they would be lost forever to a fate worse than death. There's a knife in my belt, Egon said, quietly. Take it, and use it against anything that comes from the dark. Take it. She did. Its silver hilt was like ice. There is a dark power at work here. Dany remembered something else. To go forward you must go back, and to touch the light you must pass beneath the shadow. As they stood in the dark, it seemed as if she heard something else coming, shuffling and dragging itself slowly along the stones. There's something behind us. We must go. She pulled Egon with her into the mist. They passed through it as easily as a knife cuts through butter, and suddenly they were on the other side, and the darkness closed behind them like a curtain. Before them, stood Dragonstone. Not the burning wreckage it had been on the night her dragons were born, nor the ruins she had found when she flew here on Shadow Tamer, but Dragonstone as she remembered it, proud and dark, the Targaryen banners flapping in the wind from its tower. Crows were perched atop the outer wall, on the branches of the trees, in the windows of the castle buildings. Look, Egon breathed. High atop the stone drum, 3 dragons flew in the sky. My children, Dany thought at first. No, that wasn't right. The black one was larger even than Shadow Tamer. They flitted away before their eyes, fading into the sky, and by the time Dany lowered her gaze, there were other dragons, hatching and living and dying in Dragonstone's shade. There was a beautiful silver one, with fire pale as milk, there another, with great tan wings. And then they were gone, and the world around them was as quiet as it had been on the day of its making. Servants hurried here and there, knights in Targaryen livery, and the dragon lords of old, silver-haired men and women, crowned and uncrowned. Some of them she recognized from the portraits of her youth, others were like strangers to her, although they walked with her eyes, her hair, her smile. The prince and the princess followed them, and it was as though they were the specters. They watched them feast in the great hall, pray in the September to the wooden statues of the gods, march prisoners to the dungeons and duel in the yards. It was then that Aegon saw it. The sword hung over its wearer's back, a tall silver-haired man with a dashing look who tended to a red, lean dragon, and its handle was gold, inlaid with a ruby that shimmered even in the darkness. "Dark Sister," Aegon whispered. There was no need for quiet. Neither man nor dragon could hear them. "I've seen a drawing." She had come to think the lost blade in Quaithe's warning was Brightson. But perhaps she had gotten that confused too. It grew darker on Dragonstone. It became a place of terror, of whispers and schemes and anger, as a woman with silver gold hair was crowned. The dance, Dany realized. There, dragons fought, tearing chunks of flesh from one another, killing and dying before them, filling the air with the heat of their screams and roars. They watched that same woman was betrayed, bathed in dragon fire and eaten as her son watched. They watched the death of that dragon, and it faded away too. They watched for a moment longer, and it was a different man that wielded the sword now, a knight in the white cloak of the Kingsguard. He was broad and tall, but she could not see his face for his helm, where a crest with the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen was wrought in white gold. Aemon the Dragon Knight, Dany thought in wonder, as they watched him practice his drills against a brother in white. She had never seen the beauty in sword fighting. But there was something in the knight's movements now that was more graceful than any dance, and the sound of steel against steel was like a beautiful music. When they finished, the Dragon Knight took off his helm and placed it beside his sword on a bench, and picked up a spear instead, returning to his practice. And then Aegon pulled them forward. "Aegon," Dany warned, but he heard her not. He put his own sword back on his belt and with his free hand, brought his hand to Dark Sister's helm. His graceful fingers brushed against the helm and emboldened, he wrapped his hand around it and drew it. And all of a sudden the sword was in Aegon's hand as well as on the wooden bench, two swords, identical, that the magic had made a mirror of. Its blade was dark as smoke. Something else caught her nephew's eye as the world shifted around them once more, and he brought the sword close to his body. He inhaled sharply. "Mother." The queen's face was unlined, her hair like a dark curtain around her. She held on to Rhaegar's arm as they walked towards the Sea Dragon Tower, and her brother looked so much like Viserys that for a moment, Dany dared not breathe. "Mother!" Aegon shouted. They did not hear them. "Come," said the prince, tugging at her hand. They chased the spirits of his mother and father as they walked up winding staircases. At times, they melted before them, disappearing into the black stone, but whether through Aegon's sheer will, or some power stronger even than the magic of the crows, they found them each time. At last, after what felt like hours, it seemed as though they were lost altogether, until Aegon pushed past a door and there, on a great wooden bed, the queen lay, nursing a newborn babe. "Aegon," Rhaegar said to her. "What better name for a king? Will you make a song for him?" she asked. "He has a song," Rhaegar replied. "He is the prince that was promised, and his is the song of ice and fire." He went to the window seat, picked up a harp, and ran his fingers lightly over its silvery strings. "There must be one more. The dragon has 3 heads." "That's me," Aegon said, astonished. She had dreamed this dream before. "What is happening here?" And then they were gone, and before them lay a woman laboring, her silver hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, a maester leaning between her thighs. The world was suddenly loud, full of the thunder and the crash of rain against the windows, and when the maester pulled the squalling babe from the woman's body, a torrent of blood came with it. The woman took the girl child in her arms even as she bled, and with her hands wiped away the muck of childbirth from the babe's face. "Send a raven to King's Landing," said the woman. "Tell them her name is Daenerys." Egon tugged at her hand. Come. Instead, she watched as the life left her mother and Dany was placed, crying, into a crib. She reached out to touch her, to touch herself. For a wild moment, Dany thought of taking the child into her arms, carrying her as the magic faded, finding some safe place for her in the world as Egon had the sword. But Egon pulled at her again. Daenerys. We must leave. Reluctantly, she let herself be pulled away and they went once again down the stairs, beyond the keep and through to the garden where they stood beneath the trees, and watched the destruction of Dragonstone for a second time. The world was terrible fire around them, everything ash and dust as the grass turned to stone, and for a long while there was nothing but green fire. From where they stood within this crumbled world, she could not see Viserys die though she heard her dragon roar, and knew in her heart what it meant. There was nothing for a while, and then she stood before them, forcing Brytzen to let her ride him once more. You did it, Egon said, breathless. How? The vision shifted as soon as he got the word out. And then he was there, flying in on Sea Flame as she lay pinned beneath Brytzen, and her dragons were fighting, and Dany was at his side, helping him up, and they turned their heads to hear the strange voice in the fog. And then it was gone, everything was gone, and Daenerys and Egon stood alone. Everything was still, until the first flakes of snow began to fall. They drifted slowly at first, like leaves falling off the tree, but the storm gathered quickly, and before long it was like a living thing, howling with the wind around them. The drifts were ankle-deep at first and in a blink, up to their knees. Do you smell that? Asked Egon, quietly. Dany shook her head. She didn't smell anything, only cold. It smells like death, he said. Dragonstone faded around them, or Dragonstone as she had known it. Instead there were black trees such as she had never seen before, with branches that twisted together like monstrous arms. Below their feet was only snow, and before their eyes white and black, a blanket that had fallen and drawn out all the colors out of the world. Shadows began to shift, pale things moving slowly, stumbling this way and that, and then they were upon them, men with pale faces and blue shining eyes, knights and sailors and servants, men of all kinds, all dead. Egon lifted Dark Sister. He struck at the first within his range, but his sword went through it without making impact, as though he were cutting through water. Egon tried again, and again, but it made no difference. The dead things pressed on, passing through them like mist, crawling over the isle like rats. Some had torn flesh hanging from wounds, yet there was no blood. Others marched armless, or crawled through the snow as best they could with only one leg, or none at all. Even now, Dany could hear the squawking of the crows, like some terrible chorus. And then it seemed to Dany a different sort of creature was gliding through the snow, a white shadow in the darkness. It did not stumble forward as the others had, but walked with sure steps towards them. It was neither man nor beast, neither dead nor alive, but tall and gaunt with flesh pale as milk, with armor that changed color as it moved. It sees me. Dany realized in horror. Its eyes were blue and fixed on her, and now she could see that in its hand it carried a longsword that seemed like a shard of crystal, shimmering faint blue. Egon had learned to fight with Barristan the Bold, Jaime Lannister, Arthur Dayne who was the Sword in the Morning, Prince Luwin Martell and the Red Viper of Dawn. He let go of her hand, stepped forward and met the creature with the steel of his sword. It seemed to wake something in the other creatures. Where they had stumbled blind before they walked now with a purpose, towards her. They're only spirits, Dany told herself, they can't hurt me. But they were all around her, dead and cold, and it seemed that they whispered in a tongue she did not know, some language that hurt her ears to hear and seemed to thicken the darkness all around them. Egon checked each of the white creature's blows, falling backwards then moving forwards, and all the while the walking corpses fell all around her. The first who reached her was a dead thing that might have been a young man, its face and body riddled with wounds. She half thought he would drift through her like mist, but when he pulled at her arm, she felt fingers dig into her skin. And then there was another, and they were pulling at her clothes, stroking her, twining their fingers through her hair. Desperately, she raised the knife Egon had given her and found her hand empty. All the strength left her. They will eat me alive, Dany thought. She could not move. There was a hand on her chest, clawing at her skin to get to her heart, and another pair on the soft skin of her throat, choking her. Egon shouted her name, and his breath steamed before him as he parried a blow and buried his blade in the white creature's side. The thing that he fought fell apart into water, weeping first as it melted from within, and then bursting. And then, it was gone, as though it was never there. "You are too late," the voice said, dryly, coming from everywhere and from nowhere. "Fly, fly. Now." Danae cried out, and a great heat was upon them, as warm and sweet as a mother's kiss, as a golden light burst from the skies. The dead things writhed in Brightson's fire, but where they lay in ashes, more sprouted, like endless weeds rising from the ground. A pair of strong hands were upon her, and Danae turned to find Egon, fear in his eyes, warping his face, pulling her forward. They ran. Brightson had landed before them, melting the snow to water beneath his scales. Gods, she prayed, not knowing who she meant. The seven, who she had never worshipped as well as she might have, the old gods of her husband who did not venture this far south, or to the ghosts who roamed Dragonstone. "You took my brother, my father, and my mother before them. You robbed me of my life. You have had your blood of me. Help me now, I pray you. Help me to ride Brightson one last time. One time is all I need. Please." Danae jumped and gripped onto her dragon with her arms and legs. Egon clambered on after her, and held on to her waist, and they were up. Brightson flapped his wings as they swept over the water, and the sound was like a clap of thunder. And then Shadow Tamer and Sea Flame were in the air with them, and when they looked back, the pale grey steam that rose from the Dragonman's vents was black as pitch, and red molten stone was belched from the mountain in big great plumes. They flew south, crossing the long point of Driftmark, and the great expanse of Blackwater Bay. The waters were rough and choppy today, as grey as the sky above them, and when they sighted the great forested canopy of the Kingswood, there was a thin layer of snow on the ground, and in the trees. Brightson landed there on the edge of the water, and shook them off onto the ground, and just as quickly was in the air again, taking flight with his brothers to hunt down prey in the forest. Danae rose slowly to her feet. "Are you hurt?" her nephew asked. Had it happened, or had she just dreamed it? She noticed something. "Your face is healed." Where the blisters had been, there were instead scars where the skin had toughened and acquired a light sheen. "Danae," he stood on shaky feet, and walked to her. When he reached out his hand, for a moment she thought he would caress her cheek. Instead, he touched the ends of her hair. "Your hair has grown." His breath tickled her face. It felt like the only warm thing in the world. His fingers were on her throat, and he was frowning once more. "You have scratches here from where the dead thing touched you." She shivered, and goose flesh covered her arms and legs. "You're scaring me." "Feel it." He took her hand in his, and guided it to the thin, dried scars on her skin. The scabs fell away like grains of sand under her fingers. The scratches were real, as was the sword. Dark Sister hung on Egon's hip, as though it had been there all along. Danae touched the hilt, to make sure it was real. It was warm from Egon's body and Brightson's heat. Slowly, he pulled away, but Danae did not take her hand away from her throat. "Look," Egon urged. On the horizon, a dull red glow lit the sky to the northeast, where Dragonstone had been, the color of a blood bruise, monstrous and swollen. And behind them from secret places in the Kingswood, small grey fires rose, the embers of campfires that had been snuffed out by the snow. Daenerys Targaryen wondered if this was hell. Across the water to the west, they could see where the Red Keep rose, tall and proud as ever. The sight of it strengthened her. "Can you walk?" Danae asked. He was touching his face again, fingering the scars, and pulled his hands away quickly, as though ashamed by his wonder and fear. "We should stay. Someone will come for us, they'll have seen the dragons." Danae looked behind her, at the darkness that lay between the trees. "We'll freeze to death if we stay here. Come, I'll help you." Her nephew opened his mouth, but in the end said nothing, and led them silently as they walked dazed through the edges of the wood. A weariness fell upon her, as though she had been wandering not for a day, but for a year, and her feet moved forward with a will of their own even as her eyes blinked and fell heavy with sleep. Each step roused her. It was nightfall when they heard voices once more, not those of ghosts or demons but men. They had left the watery edges of Blackwater Bay and crossed to the forest where it thinned towards King's Landing, walking under the trees alongside the King's Road. Egon pulled them behind a great oak. From here, they could see them, men, old and young, with their women, holding babes at their breasts or guiding along their children, torches lighting their path. Some drove farm wagons or bumped along in the back of ox carts. Fewer rode. One woman led a milk cow with a little girl on its back. A smith pushed a wheelbarrow with his tools inside, hammers and tongs and even an anvil, and a little while later a different man with a different wheelbarrow, and inside this one were 2 babies in a blanket. Most came on foot, with their goods on their shoulders. They were going south. It was an endless stream of people. We could ask them for help, Dany thought. But they walked with weary looks upon their faces, some half-starved, others half-frozen, and the princess had nothing to give them. And if she called her dragon now, they would only panic and their fear would be a great danger to them, as they trod this way and that, falling over one another and trying to flee to safety. Slowly, they left their hiding place, and continued their own march north, climbing carefully over roots and through slick puddles in the ground where snow had melted. It was dawn when they arrived at the edge of the forest and the last trees that opened up to the King's Road. The stream of people did not end, but grew thicker here close to King's Landing, where wagons lumbered along, axles creaking, slowed down where wheels were stuck in a rut and men had to come free them. The hedge of wagons and carts and people was like a wall. "We'll be mobbed if we try to cross," Egon murmured. "If we wait until nightfall, we can sneak through." Daenerys doubted that. Night might hide much, but not silver hair and purple eyes. But they could not cross now, that was true enough. They settled beneath the underbrush, positioned so they could watch the King's Road and see anyone who came upon them, sitting on the cold ground, shoulder to shoulder. Dany watched the road for a while, saw crying children and desperate girls marching barefoot, when she began to nod off. Her head dropped into the hollow of Egon's shoulder. She dreamt she was looking into Brightson's eyes, as she had when he had pinned her to the ground and she thought he might devour her. There was no fear in her this time. In the red of his eyes, there was a boy. A boy with auburn hair. Robb. No, Bran Stark. Lord Eddard's second son had red eyes, and sat on a throne of pale, white trunks. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he seemed to be saying, "I only wanted to show you." And then another face took shape before her. It was as a corpse, white hair, white skin, save for a red spot on his neck and cheek. One eye was gone and, in its place, a weirwood root grew. The other eye was red and 1,000 more swirled around it. Daenerys woke with a start. It had not snowed on her at least. But Egon was gone from her side, and the road was choked still. There were more men on horses now. Knights, she realized, wielding torches and shouting orders. She rose slowly, and when she did, a voice called to her through the trees. "Dany." Egon stood in a clearing to her left, and she could see more knights with him, and Sir Barristan and Sir Jaime both, gleaming white in the moonlight. "Tell the princess what you told me," Egon commanded, softly. Sir Barristan stepped forward, and bowed. On his face, worry was etched, and he did not try to hide it. "Your Grace, it gladdens my heart to see you. We thought you and the prince had flown north, but after the first month with no sign of you." "Month?" she asked, confused. If Egon commanded his knights to play her false, she could not think why, when 100 other lies might have suited him better. "He flew to Dragonstone yesterday morning." "You're mistaken, sir. My lady, we have had no sign of you or the prince for 3 months." "It's true," Dany said. "The prince." He was disquieted too, she saw it in his glance. "Egon has been gone 2 days," Dany repeated. "I've been gone 2 nights. Your Grace flew from King's Landing on the first night of snowfall and Prince Egon went after you in the morning. We received word from sailors near Driftmark that they spied dragons fighting above Dragonstone that same day, and I sailed myself with Prince Oberyn to search for you both. We found nothing." For a moment Dany was so shocked she had no words. "No, I know what I saw, sir. I was with there. We did not leave Dragonstone. You must not have searched everywhere." 3 months. Something dawned on her. It was winter now. The wagons, the cries, the bare feet and ragged clothing. Marching through the Kingswood in the cold, as though running from something. Dany's hand went to her neck once more, and she remembered the dead things that had tried to kill her. Were they too late? Why are these people fleeing? They are starving. Sir Barristan seemed old beyond his years. Lord Tyrell has closed the Rosa Road. Notes. Phew, this chapter was a tough one to write. I was ready to post it 3 different times, and kept going back and rewriting it before settling on this version. This was heavily influenced by the new season of Russian Doll on Netflix and rereading a bunch of meta about Bran, and how potentially he's messing with time itself. The issues between Aegon and Dany have certainly not been resolved, but momentarily paused and the terms of it radically shifted. This chapter is also quite heavy on the magic, which I know not everyone is a fan of, but I hope you enjoy the chapter before we move on more nitty-gritty politicking in the next few chapters. Thank you again to everyone for your comments and for sharing your inspiring ideas, reactions and thoughts with me. I'm so grateful and appreciative of your readership. Chapter 28, Barristan 3. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. It was often said that men may plot and plan and scheme, but they had best pray as well, for no plan ever made by man has ever withstood the whims of the gods above. Prince Aegon had played at being the devout prince. He had walked from the Red Keep to the Great September barefoot, been anointed with the 7 oils by the High Septon himself before King Rhaegar dubbed him a knight, and was seen praying in the Royal September. But his faith did not reach down to the heart of him. And now the gods had made playthings of his hopes. He had been brought before the Queen alone, passing carefully through the maze of the Red Keep so he may be seen by as many as lords and ladies of the court first. Half the day passed thus, the prince ensconced with his mother and the Red Viper. The Queen had shown a rare strength in the early days of Rhaegar's rule, when she had been made to bear the presence of Lady Lyanna, and had served the king dutifully since, but the past 3 months had been a trial of a different sort. She would not withstand talk of some harm having befallen the prince, tasked the Red Viper with the search, and turned her will towards the famine. The Rosby and Stokeworth lands kept the Red Keep supplied, but there were no more feasts, no more banquets nor dances. A quarter of each shipment was set aside and another quarter sent through the city. The Prince of Dawn had sent so much dried oranges and plums that the streets smelled sugary sweet, and Lord Tully gave as much of his harvest as he dared without leaving his own people hungry of the wall to starve, but it was not enough. Each day, more died. Prince Aegon came to find Sir Barristan in the White Sword Tower. Rhaegar's son looked older than his years today, his face scared, his look weary. He stood before the whitewashed stone walls dressed all in black, flipping slowly through the white book. "Where is Daenerys?" was the first thing he asked. "The princess is in yard, waiting for the saddle maker. The last and final saddle would be needed for the 3rd dragon, and chains to go with it." Prince Aegon closed the book, and ran his fingers across the top, as though to wipe away dust. "My mother and uncle would have her go north, as Lady Lyanna has gone. Lyanna Stark chose to return to Winterfell after news of Lord Eddard's demise reached her. We had no right to deny her." The prince seemed on the verge of saying something, but decided otherwise. "Well, it's no matter now. Is she gone for good?" "I believe so. Her household belonged to Crown. It was well furnished, I remember from my boyhood, and the stone came at great cost from the mountains of the Westerlands. If she's not to return, I would have it torn down and sold, and the coin used to buy food from the east." The prince's tone betrayed nothing. "Lord Connington has written to the king and ordered it done," said Sir Barristan cautiously. The Hand had ever thought the king was too kind to his bastard's mother, this woman for whom the realm had been torn asunder, and at last he would have his way. "Your Grace, you wished to speak of Princess Daenerys?" "Yes." "Dany." Prince Aegon motioned for him to sit. He obliged. "Speak freely to me, sir. I would hear the truth, as you see it. If I may ask, does your intent remain to wed the princess?" "Yes." "That has not changed." Everything else had. The Tyrells had closed the Rosa Road claiming to have sent all the harvests they could spare, while spreading tales of the prince running away with the princess or fleeing Westeros altogether. The winter storms were already thick in the north, and if the king's armies did not march now they would never make it through. Eddard Stark was dead, or may as well be. The last thing his men saw were whites crawling across the air to Karstark while Lord Eddard, Jon Umber, and Lord William Dustin fought off a dead bear. "I believe if you wed her, Lord Tyrell will begin to gather allies among the other houses and renounce his fealty to the Iron Throne." The Laughing Storm had risked the same. Lenal Baratheon had less to be wary of, the dragons long dead, but where Mace Tyrell had more to fear, he had more to lose. The birth of the dragons had made the Targaryens true dragon lords once again, and Mace Tyrell's children and grandchildren would be dragon riders. Few houses could boast of that. And while King Rhaegar was loved, his had been a fractured peace. The Reach could not field an army against 3 dragons, but with 2 or 3 of the other kingdoms and mass of the Crown Lands forces moving north already, might think to inflict enough damage as to bring the Prince of Dragonstone to heel. Closing the Rosa Road was but the first stroke. The prince frowned. I would have no choice but to fight them. Yes. Lord Tyrell would rely on that, and on us meeting him on ground of his own choosing. If you march west to strike against the Reach, it will be deep winter by the time we turn north, and I do not believe the land routes will remain open to us. If the wall still stands. If I wage war on the Tyrells, we will lose the battle for the wall. At last, he withdrew his hand from the white book and brought it to his face, mindlessly fingering the pale scars that bloomed there. The scars were months old, though the prince said he was only gone for 2 nights. He had poured out the tale in the forest as they waited for Princess Daenerys to wake and his knights to clear the king's road to allow them passage. It was one that Sir Barristan had listened to in a stunned silence. Princess Daenerys taming a second dragon, strange voices in the mist, visions of the splendor of House Targaryen and the fall of Dragonstone, before the shades of whites came upon them and the flew to the Kingswood. Sir Barristan might have called it madness if he had heard it from the lips of a different man, but Prince Aegon was not thus tainted. He might have called it lies, but neither was the prince a teller of tall tales for their own sake. But then there was the sword, hanging on Prince Aegon's hip, and there was no doubt it was Valyrian steel. He called it Dark Sister, and it matched the descriptions of the Targaryen blade of old. And when the princess awoke, she told the same tale. Was there a word for it other than sorcery? So I will not wage war against them, then. What shall I do instead? Aegon asked, and it seemed he asked both the knight and himself. Before anything, we must feed the people of King's Landing. The surplus stores from the Riverlands and the food bought from the east are all due north. The city was full of hungry mouths, but the wall even more so, and growing more crowded each day. The king has every 1 ship out of 5 sent to the capital, and when it arrives, the queen sets half of its bounty aside for when winter is truly come. Her Grace has men building fishing crafts and taking to the sea all across Blackwater Bay, but the waters are growing more choppy and the sailing is hard. All this leaves behind too many empty mouths. And one day the king will run out of coin and the ships will stop arriving altogether. My uncle says both the Reach and Dawn have one more cold weather harvest before them. I don't doubt Mace has field hands on plough horses and swinging scythes even now. That was true enough, though where the Reach's lands were bountiful, most of Dawn was an arid wasteland. Their last harvest would not be enough for sharing. But the Tyrells are not the only men of the Reach with fields on their land. What does your Grace suggest? When Jon Arryn called his banners and rose against my grandfather, there were loyalists to the crown in the Vale who rose against him. There are bannermen in every corner of Westeros who wait for the downfall of their great lord so they might take his place, and some who even work towards it in the shadows. My father taught me that. Barristan chewed on that. The Oakhurts of Old Oak, the Florents of Brightwater Keep, the Rowans of Golden Grove, the Peaks of Starpike and the Redwynes of the Arbor all claimed older and more distinguished lineages than the Tyrells. Aegon sighed. Daenerys can join the hosts of Edmure Tully and Jon Arryn as they march north. It will make the Tyrells look like liars before the realm to see her and her dragons fly with the old friends of House Stark. I shall let her go. For now, his look seemed to say. Sir Barristan found he was relieved. It meant Aegon was not unchangeable, that if his will could be bent he was not so proud that he could not at least retreat for a time. And the princess would be pleased to hear it. He thought of the look on her face when he had brought her the dire news of Lord Stark as they stood together in the yard. I feel sorry for Lord Eddard to die in such a way, she had said. It hasn't been so long, has it? He might still return. By the laws of man, Princess Daenerys was Lady Stark now and her child heir to Winterfell, but Robb Stark had not lost hope of his father's return yet, Sir Arthur's last letter said, and would not claim his title yet. Where the prince dared boldly with his aunt, the woman on whom his desires and hopes turned, he would have to tread more carefully with the Lady of Winterfell. And a dragon rider twice over. I would have the King's Road as it leads to Storm's End closed to the small folk. Lord Baratheon's forces may sail north instead. We can supply the ships. The roads must be closed leading to the Riverlands too, and the Gold Road as it leads to the Lannisters' mountains. Tywin Lannister will thank us for that. I think Aegon lowered his eyes at that. Any small folk who wishes to leave King's Landing will be directed west, and told they can find succor in the bounties of Highgarden. Your Grace, the Rosa Road too is closed. At the Mondea, yes. There are leagues and keeps between the Kingswood and there. If they are turned back at Bitterbridge, they will spill south to the Blueburn and north to the lands held by the Rowans. They will harry Tyrell's lords as they travel west in the tens of thousands, and those lords will turn to Highgarden for relief as their yards crowd with hungry mouths and their fields are pillaged. The small folk had already reached Tumblertown, though the great mass of them was travelling south, away from the cold. Some would follow the river to Bitterbridge, where they might be pushed back. On foot, they would spill out across the Reach's northern borders. Those who followed the King's Road would go south if they found no refuge in Caswell's castle. They would be bound there by the Dornish marches and the treacherous paths that led to the lands of the Prince of Dorne. Those who lived would continue west, to Longtable, and Cider Hall, and Ashford. Perhaps 1 in every 100 would make it as far as Highgarden. But first, they would swamp the market towns of the Reach's eastern borders. The fruits of Lord Tyrell's work would be laid at his bannerman's doorstep in the form of angry, starving mobs. They would slaughter them, and be known as butchers before the Seven Kingdoms, or feed them, and rid King's Landing of its starving mobs. But there are too many, and the number of refugees would only grow as it grew colder. The lords would break then, or so the prince hoped, and make peace, send the stores they owed so they might keep the small folk within the walls of the city. In the meantime, the mobs would harry Tyrell's lands. Some lords may open their gates, yes, or permit them to pass through their villages, but a great number of them will die. If not from the cold and hunger then from steel. Already, there were more and more corpses in the Kingswood each day. They had set to digging great ditches in the forest to bury the bodies. The cold was the only thing to keep the stench at bay. I know, the prince said, so quietly. They will die in the Reach, or they will die in the Kingswood and in the Stormlands and in the alleys of King's Landing. I have no food to give them. Sir Barristan did not like the taste of this. Your Grace, there is another path. The Tyrells must be made to answer for their actions, yes, but they can pay for it in coin and soldiers, he said, and wondered if he dared too much. If you wed Margaery in exchange, Lord Mace will reopen the Rosa Road and we will have food in King's Landing by fortnight's end. The prince frowned. Every other lord has answered my father's call. They haggle over how many men they will send, perhaps, and think they will be fighting wildlings maddened by some sort of plague, half believing the others have returned, but they obeyed. All except Tyrell. Tell me, sir, what right does he have to ignore his king's call and starve his city? What right does he have to spread tales that I have stolen Daenerys' dragons after raping her so I might draw out her powers, that my Dornish blood makes me lustful beyond reason? His mouth twisted bitterly at that. Sir Barristan had heard the rumours. The Red Viper planted his own, that the prince and princess remained on Dragonstone, binding the dragons further to them, but the beasts had not been seen on the horizon for too long, and other tales spread more easily. Mace Tyrell had no right to close the Rosa Road, your grace. But I would not be troubled overmuch with his words. That is the way of these lords. I have lived it since I served under your great-grandfather. There are always whispers and lies and plots hatched in the dark. In this, Lord Mace is no different than any other. Perhaps you're right, but I won't suffer him to be grandfather to my children, nor will I ever sleep easily with Margaery in my bed. Even if something were to happen to Daenerys when we face the others, I would not look to Tyrells for a bride. The prince's cheeks were flushed, and his eyes were so cold and hard Barristan did not doubt his words. All this they dare knowing the dragons have returned. They dare this because the dragons have returned. Sir Barristan found himself thinking of another Aegon, King Aegon the Unlikely, in whose troubled reign the night had been born. What might that king have dared if he had dragons? What might Jaehaerys? What might Aerys have done, a darker thought asked, if he had not only wildfire at his hands but a dragon's living flame? They are testing your mettle, your grace. And I mean to prove it. When it came to the Princess Daenerys, The prince acquiesced. Sabaristan did not see them parting. His lot, as it had been for many of his days, was to stand guard outside as the princess and the prince said their farewells in Queen Elia's chambers. Only murmurs reached him. "Our cause is the same," the princess' sweet voice drifted through the doors. "I will never forget that. Neither should you." Her and her 2 dragons flew west that afternoon to meet with where the hosts of Tully and Arin massed. The prince had conceded too quickly, had sent away too easily the woman who he would make his queen, who held 2 dragons of her own. And the thought had begun to grow in Sabaristan, that perhaps the prince had sent her away so she would not witness what he might do next. He felt very tired, very old. Where have all the years gone? Of late, whenever he caught a glimpse of himself, he saw a stranger's face gazing at him. When had those crow's feet first appeared around his pale blue eyes? How long ago had his hair turned from sunlight into snow? Years ago, old man. Decades. The day was young and fresh, and yet he felt bone-tired, as if he'd fought all night. The older he got, the less sleep Sabaristan seemed to need. As a squire he could sleep 10 hours a night and still be yawning when he stumbled out onto the practice yard. Now he found that 5 hours a night was more than enough. Last night, he had scarce slept at all. Though he was not a pious man, he had found his feet leading him to the September. He had turned to the statue warrior in the black watches of the night. "Shield me from these doubts that gnaw at me," he had prayed, "and give me the strength to do what is right." But neither prayer nor dawn had brought him certainty. It was not his place to doubt, no matter how much it gnawed at him, nor to lead. He was only asked to obey, and in that, his voice had been only one out of many in the council. Mace Tyrell had gone too far, he had begun to suspect. The council had been wroth, their anger doubled with the return of their prince and the dragons. John Connington argued for filling Lord Tyrell's council seat with another loyal lord. Lord Went put forward the names of 10 other maidens who might better suit the prince, and Lord Valerian proposed plans to blockade the Reach's coasts, if need be. In their own way, they each tested him, gauging how far he would go, how deep his own anger ran. Only the Red Viper watched silently. Sabaristan spoke, said his piece, and wished the king was here. Ravens had been sent to the wall with details as sparse as they dared trust to quill and parchment, and Roriger's written reply had been to affirm that his son and his hand were charged with settling matters in his absence. Some voices, their words accented by the tones of dawn, would say it was testament to the king's trust in his heir. Others, perhaps, more quietly, that he had come to fear his son, this dragon rider who might seek to unseat him as Roriger himself unseated Aerys. Others still said that Roriger had closed his eyes to King's Landing, as he had when he left it to Aerys and his court of pyromancers. The king's true intent travelled through more secret paths, brought down to the wall from the mouth of one of the Red Viper's bastard daughters. The prince's betrothal had been made when he was a boy and before the birth of the dragons, the king conceded, and now his son was a man, and a man who was prince must learn and bear the price of his choices. The king would not withstand bloodshed, nor would he spare any knights meant for the battles at the wall to fight a war in the south. Aegon must find another path. The prince thought over those words for a night, and when he rose in the morning, he deemed that he would do more with words than dragons, or swords. The bells in the 7 towers of the great September of Baelor rang as the prince and his company rode up to Visneur's hill. Each moment had been planned down to the very last step. Food rations for the small folk had been more generously doled in the days before so the crowds might be sated, or near so, and 1,000 gold cloaks walked the city, clearing the streets, setting barricades, and patrolling the rooftops with crossbows. 1,000 more men and women roamed the city, ragged and unwashed, planting the seed of rumors here and there of the return of the dragons and of the Tyrell's betrayal. That was the Red Viper's work, and Sabaristan had no taste for it. They made quick progress through the city streets. Sabaristan had no wish to linger long in the open. He rode on one side of the prince, Sir Jaime on the other, and behind them came 100 knights. There were no mobs shouting for food today. Instead, they screamed Martell, Targaryen, Prince Aegon, King Roriger, and threw flowers at their feet, trampled beneath their horses' hoofs. When the great September of Baelor loomed before them, with its magnificent dome and 7 shining towers, Sabaristan turned to his prince one last time. "Your Grace, are you certain?" The Prince of Dragonstone looked resplendent today in red and black, his dragon flying overhead. His silver gold hair danced in the cool wind behind him. He had left his crown behind, as well as the magnificent blade Dark Sister. I am. He slid from his horse as easily as one who had been in his saddle his whole life, and climbed the marble steps alone, on foot, to best show his humbleness before the faith. Inside, the High Septon would meet him, that squat man, grey with age and fat, and the Prince of Dragonstone would attend morning service alone. Afterwards, he would charm the High Septon as they conferred beneath the great September's lofty dome of glass and gold and crystal. Sabaristan waited to see his prince entered the great September, for the heavy doors to close behind him, and the dragon called Sea Flame to perch on one of the towers overhead before he turned his eyes to the city. The plaza slowly began to fill with taverners and tradesfolk, tanners and stable boys and beggars, some with children on their shoulders, others with wares that they laid out on the ground and tried to sell. He wondered how many among them were small folk of King's Landing, and how many were mummers. Some smiled, pointing up at the dragon, others flinched each time it flapped its wings, but almost all were hollow-cheeked and weary-eyed. The sight of them troubled him, but the gold cloaks were plenty, he reminded himself, and the dragon enough to give anyone who thought to commit ill deeds pause. It did not snow, and that was a mercy at least, but there was cold in their air nonetheless, and many of the gatherers wore nothing but rags. How many would be alive in a week, in a month? Even now, soldiers and ravens had been sent to close the roads. Prince Egon sought to weaken Lord Tyrell's hold on his bannermen, to loose these masses across their lands so the knights of the Reach may begin to question the cost of their lord's stubbornness. He was wise to see the massacre that would come with a pitched battle, but a different sort of blood would spill nonetheless. Beyond the plaza, across the city, Egon's high hill rose in the distance, the towers and battlements of the Red Keep, blushing in the light of the cold sun. A day would come when the King's Guard would stand here once more, all 7 in their gleaming armor, and the prince would be crowned Egon the 6th of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms and Protector of the realm. On that day, when he rode out of the September of Baelor on Sea Flame, what would the people say as they cheer for him? Would they call him Egon the Dragon, after the first? Sabaristan wondered if he would live to see the day. King Roegar had begun his reign among turmoil and treachery. Sabaristan prayed it would end in peace. A bell began to toll. Sabaristan and Sir Jaime turned from the plaza, and climbed the marble steps up to the September. Jaime Lannister wore his scaled armor today, the color of milk, and beneath his white cloak he shined gold from head to foot, with a lion's head helm hiding his face. He was eager to go to the wall, tired of standing guard outside quiet rooms while their brothers prepared to fight at the edge of the world. He would bloody his golden sword soon enough. The great September's towering doors were open. They walked together through the inner doors, into the September proper, their footsteps echoing off the marble floor. Dust motes swam in the beams of colored light slanting down through the leaded glass of the great dome. Incense sweetened the air, and beside the 7 altars candles shone like stars. 1,000 twinkled for the mother and near as many for the maid. The prince stood alone beneath the warrior. He stood before the altar with head on one side and chin in his hand as though it were a puzzle, as though his eyes were searching for a hole where a key went or some hidden door that, when opened, might spill out its secrets to him. His face was as still as the statue before him. Wordlessly, they walked down a wide aisle, one of 7 that met beneath the dome, and fell in beside the prince. He led them after that, stepping behind the altar and through a small door that led to a marble staircase that wound its way across the hall and out to an upper level, where they could look out at the city through windows of stained glass. Like his dragon, the prince preferred to watch from on high. The plaza below them was like a multicolored world half hidden in the slanting shafted of sunlight. It shone on the prince's face and made the purple in his eyes play, here lilac, there indigo and blue, but deep and unknowable. 10 years ago I would have known his thoughts at a glance. Instead, he could only stand and wait and guess. The High Septon stepped to his pulpit. He had the wisdom today not to wear his immense, monstrous crown, though perhaps that had been the prince's work too. Behind him stood 6 septons in silver robes, and surrounding them 77 septars that had begun to sing for mercy even before the bell stopped tolling. A silence followed, and the gold-cloaked spearman moved to hold back the crowd. The gods have seen fit to test us in these dark days. We have seen hunger and cold ravage our city, and our people leave their homes each day for the great wild woods with aching bellies. The Septon's own belly shook as he spoke with his deep, swelling voice. Take comfort in knowing that gods are just, and they are angered by envy, lust, and sloth. Most grievous among these sins is gluttony. Let the gods look down now and bear witness. Accursed in the man who hoards his harvests while thousands of innocents starve. The crowd roared, and the gold cloaks jostled against them, pushing them back. Come, the prince said softly, and they climbed further, the sounds of the Septon's sermon streaming through. He was speaking about the Kingswood and the death that had befallen those who fled there, and proclaiming the prince's arrival would cast away the suffering away as it had the sorcery that had thrived there. It was Lioness Dark that his high holiness meant. Rumors had followed her since she took Roriger's bastard from the Red Keep to the household the king made for her in the forest. Villagers and crofters carried with them tales of strange lights and eerie noises coming from within, of cattle that came down with strange illnesses if they happened to herd too closely to its walls. Sir Oswell had once remarked that the small folk would have loved Lady Lionel, if only she had died. She would have been their beloved king's lost love, then. Instead, she lived as the witch who had sent the realm into grief. A cold wind seemed to rise up below them, and with each step they took a deepening warmth was upon their face, as though they were walking up towards the sun. No, not the sun. The dragon. With a gesture of his hand, the prince stopped them once more, and looked down. Blessed Balor also taught us that the gods are merciful to the good. The High Septon's voice was faint to hear, and it drifted up with the wind. The Prince of Dragonstone has returned to us, and where he flies, they smile upon us. Soon, the dragon fire will grant us all a summer without ending. 1,000 voices screamed for Egon. It's time, he said. Thank you both. They bowed, and watched him climb up the rest of the stairs. They would remain here until the plaza was cleared, and together with the gold cloaks, ride back to the city. The High Septon went on. Prince Egon came before the gods with a humble and obedient heart. He lit candles at each of the 7 altars and together we prayed for peace and guidance. Is not such a prince worthy of a maiden of equal purity? When he takes the throne, should he not sit beside a queen of humble heart, of unspoiled intent? Not the daughter of avarice and treachery. The crowd shouted below. Let the sinners come before the gods, and atone for their wrongs. Let today mark a new age, then, an age of justice. The High Septon says so much for a man who says so little, Sir Jaime said dryly. That's true enough. The sound swelled from below, and then it was not the small folk who were roaring but Sea Flame, as he burst forward with the prince on his back from atop the tower. As dragon and rider flew around the city, the small folk followed, calling Targaryen and Egon as loudly as the bells had rung before. The prince would lead them thus, until the crowds had thinned and tired, and he would return to the Red Keep. Sir Barristan watched him dance in the sunlight, gliding across the sky like a swan over water. With a dragon, however, any misstep meant death. Notes. Thank you for the generous and kind response to the previous chapter. I felt so inspired reading through them and I'm grateful for your continued readership. If Egon's initial plan was to marry Dany quickly and impregnate her, the 3 months he just lost has forced him to rethink his plan. It was potentially going to have a high cost either way, which he acknowledged, but the political landscape changed very quickly. Instead, he's found himself with a starving city, tens of thousands of refugees moving towards Dorne and the Stormlands, the Tyrells spreading rumors which would erode his support, instead of the carefully planned and orchestrated wedding. I don't see him as someone who is politically inflexible. In this case, he's able to see that he has to create another political possibility for himself and play a longer game than he intended. Lucky for Dany, because she gets to leave, but all roads lead to the wall, so the for now Barristan foresaw, is very much a heavy thing that follows them. This chapter is summed up well by Varys's quote, "Why is it always the innocents who suffer most, when you High Lords play your Game of Thrones?" Egon certainly isn't the first person to worsen the suffering of the small folk, he says in not so many words. Mace Tyrell did it first, and sadly won't be the last. He decides to use them against the Tyrells in place of soldiers, and at the same time to try to reverse the PR campaign by getting the faith on his side, and flexing for the first time the soft power of the dragons. As for Roriger, I came across a brilliant meta about him which I've been trying and failing all morning to find. It made a really compelling argument about Roriger's political inaction in canon, how he's provided opportunities to enact real change but doesn't follow through. For example, at the tourney of Harrenhal, which was ostensibly an opportunity for him to plot with the Lords, until Aerys decides to show up. Instead of pivoting, he takes the nuclear option of alienating every single one of those potential allies by crowning Lyanna. Similarly, outside Duskendale, when Tywine declares Roriger would be a better king than Aerys, another opening for him to do something about his father. In other words, he lacks effective political skills, and in this fic, that vacuum is filled by the Martells, Connington, and the small council. His reaction to Aegon here is symptomatic of that, but also the fact he genuinely has his hands tied. He could command Aegon to marry Margaery, but Aegon is a grown man with a dragon. Any threats to disinherit him would be empty at this point. There were great discussions about this in the comments of the last chapter for anyone interested, and he can't exactly be dragged down the aisle. Roriger may also have his own thoughts about Aegon's potential bride, post-dragons. Phew, that was long. All that to say, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I hope you enjoy the chapter. Chapter 29, Daenerys 12. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. When she first glimpsed Winterfell, then a maiden who knew so little of the world, it had thrilled and frightened her. Its grey granite walls hid a world that was larger even than the Red Keep, made of endless room after room, filled with the smells of moist earth and smoke and fresh-baked bread. There was no light rain here, no dampness in the air that heralded a storm, nor the sound of waves crashing against cliff. It was a world of its own, filled with strangers, with men with bearded faces and hard looks, and women who seemed always in a rush, and spoke with northern accents she had to train her ears to hear. The keep, as large as it was, had seemed fit to bursting with the lords and ladies that had come for her wedding, bringing gifts from their lands and inviting her to make a tour of them. They might not have loved Roriger, but she was the king's sister and would be Lady of Winterfell someday, and none had dared speak with anything but courtesy, no matter how cold. Dany might have enjoyed it more, if she hadn't been so frightened. Her own rooms had been vast, one level down from Lady and Lord Stark, and her husband had left behind his childhood bed so he could take the ones across from her. She had not dared cry, even on the loneliest of nights, for fear that he might hear her, until one day she no longer wished to. She grew accustomed to Winterfell, to her husband, as her septars told her she would, and when her son was born, she thought of Dragonstone infrequently. Dany wondered what she would feel when she caught sight of the Stark's castle once more. From the Riverlands, it felt a world away. Lord Jon Arryn had marched with his armies to the King's Road. The Lord of the Vale, who had seemed so old on his visits to Dragonstone even when she was a child, was missing more of his teeth and all his hair now. He had not sailed on pike. The Vale's forces had numbered few there, and been led by young knights eager to prove themselves, and it surprised her to see him atop his horse, armored. He greeted her cordially, as he ever did, but his eyes watched the sky for her dragons all the while. Dany had grown used to that, but there was something in his look that she did not like. It was not wonder, nor fear, but a wariness that hid his distrust. Viserys would have laughed at that. "At last we can teach them the meaning of our words," he would have said. But he was dead. At his side rode Sir Brynden Tully, an elderly man too but more robust, with features that were lined and weathered, bushy eyebrows fat as caterpillars and grey hair. He had Robb's eyes, Dany realized with a pang, her son's eyes. Even Edmure Tully, to whom smiles came so easy, seemed troubled at the sight of her. He was courteous enough, and brought with him 4 pretty, brown-haired serving girls, saying that a princess must have some women to attend her, but was otherwise guarded and quiet in a way that did not suit him. The lords of the Vale and the Riverlands did not travel with their full strength. Winter was upon them, and men were needed in their keeps. For every knight, there was a handful of crofters, field hands, fishermen, and for every tried commander, a shepherd, the sons of innkeeps and traders and tanners. Aegon had spoken with her of his dreams of a standing army, when he was king, a host that would rival those of the free cities, where each guardsman would be paid in coin. But he had not thought the lords would withstand it. They might take it as a threat for the Iron Throne to wield such a force. With the dragons, the world was full of possibility once more. But all this he'd shared before he'd told her he would wed her to do it. It was only a fortnight ago, by her count, the pain of it still fresh, But no, it was more than 3 months. Each time she remembered that, she would touch the back of her neck, where her hair had grown as though overnight and began to tickle at the soft skin there. It was not only soldiers who had come to join their march at the crossroads where the lands of Tully and Arryn met. Dany had seen them as she'd flown, a trickle of people, limping and haggard, walking north along the King's Road. They were not so many as those she had seen fleeing south, in search of warmer, more bountiful lands, but they were there nonetheless, no less desperate, no less hungry. Even from atop her dragon, where her worries seemed always to melt away from her, Dany had felt her heart in her throat. The famine was Mace Tyrell's work, Aegon had insisted that, and it was. Lord Mace had disobeyed his king, and hoarded his harvest for himself. But if there was blood on his hands, did it not sully Aegon's too, and her own? Aegon had broken an oath to the Tyrells, not his own perhaps, as he argued, but that of his mother and father, who had made the match for him, and Tyrell had responded in kind. And as for her, it all went back to her dragons. Quaithe had warned here. They shall come day and night to see the wonder that has been born again into the world, and when they see they shall lust. For dragons are fire made flesh, and fire is power. Aegon had lusted, for her and for them, and when he bound himself to see flame and showed it to the world, the Tyrells wanted him for their daughter all the more. If only I had. The words died within her each time. If only she had, not flown to Dragonstone, but what choice had she had? Pike too had been a mistake. She had marched from blunder to blunder, and every piece of counsel she was given rung more hollow than the last. Aegon had glumly said that if she did not wish to share his rule, there was no need to share his concerns for his people. He said it so she might give him comfort, Dany knew, but she hardened her heart and left him to his brooding. Sir Barristan and Sir Jaime taught her what she should know of the road the armies would take, which would split up after they entered the Gift to travel to Castle Black, and which were meant for the Watch's other castles. Only the Queen had spoken to her plainly. They were sisters by blood and by law, but Rhaegar's wife had always been unknowable to Dany, beautiful and distant, as reachable as a portrait hung in a frame. The men you march with will not love you, the Queen had said to her in her chambers, the day Dany left the Red Keep. Aegon had been there too, sitting at a table with endless papers sprawled out before him. Lord Tyrell's words will have reached them. You're a girl no longer, you must know what that means to have your honor questioned. Choose each word carefully and be blameless in your actions. Viserys had told her much of the same, 100 years ago, when she had first flowered. How to smile at the wrong man, to give him her favor, was enough to make her a whore. And the rumors that swirled were of more than smiles. Each one was different, but all were vile and turned on the tale that Aegon had stolen her and raped her, and held her prisoner on Dragonstone. Aegon had once told her he would choose seeing over blindness each time. So Dany had made herself see, the mistrust in the Lord's eyes, their mouths twisting to call her slut out of her hearing. She turned her eyes to sights even more difficult, to the state of the people who arrived day after day to the camp, ragged and starved. Every camp had its followers, whores and washerwomen and hawkers, smiths, and carters. These were of a different sort. They traveled barefoot, or on torn shoes held together with rotting ropes, and brought their sick and dying with them, crowded together on carts, pulled forward by the least weak among them. Their oxen and mules were long dead, or sold, Dany suspected, and so few children remained. With them came confusion and clangor, as they traveled from tent to tent, offering to serve this lord or that, cleaning his chamber pot or cooking his meals, anything in exchange for some coin or bread. When the tents and pavilions came down, when squires tossed pails of water over cook fires and soldiers took out their oilstones to give their blades on last good lick, and at long last they began the march north, the small folk came with them. Each night when they broke their march, they slept with no defences to speak of, nothing but small groups of outriders patrolling their perimeters. Dany had acclaimed a seat in the councils of Lord Arryn, the Blackfish and Edmure Tully, disquieted to think of what they might be discussing without her. If they grumbled at that, they would have to learn to bear it. One night, as they passed the twins, a knight sworn to House Royce had come to them, and argued for pits and sharpened stakes. Our enemies are leagues away to the north, Lord Arryn had said, not understanding, until the knight explained how the small folk were harrying them, begging for alms day and night, and soon they would take to stealing. Their desperation was her work, and Aegon's. and if they set guards against them, it meant they would use force against anyone who crossed their lines. I am only a young girl and know little of such things, but it seems to me you cannot punish a man for a crime he might commit, she said. They would steal because they are hungry and cold. So we should give them food and clothes before they turn into thieves. There are always jobs to do in camp, I've learned, but more like than not they'll settle in the village we come across. They are free to go where they wish within the king's realm. No longer, your grace. Prince Egon has ordered the roads closed. Any refugees are to go to the Reach, the knight responded. The Reach. Dany grasped to make sense of it. Her surprise must have shown on her face, for Edmure spoke quickly, to fill the silence. These people are here now, and we march on Tully lands still. I'll have them clothed and fed. That had been the end of that. She took 2 of the girls into her own service, though she had no tasks for them, and Edmure Tully a gaggle of boys who he tasked with learning to care for his horses. The rest followed as ever, with bread in their bellies now. Edmure had come to her 2 days after, and brought her news that Rhaenys had given him another child, a silver-haired girl with blue eyes that she called Alysanne. That softened him, and he seemed once more to be the man she had met in Riverrun, whom her niece had found happiness with. They spoke carefully of Egon. He had ordered the roads closed, as the knight claimed, and the refugees sent to the Reach, where even the High Septon said its lords should come forward to meet them with the bounties from their last harvest. Dany held her face still as a mask as she listened. Edmure tried to do the same, though not so ably. It troubled him, as it troubled her, but neither gave voice to it. The Lord of Riverrun had other matters on his mind. When they stopped their march in the evening, he called together the lords who followed him, Lord Tytos and his son Brynden, Lord Vance of Wayfarer's Rest and his heir, Sir Ronald Vance of Atranta, Sir Tristan Roger, Lord Clement Piper and his son Mark, Jason and Patrek Mallister, Raymond D'Ari who was a friend to House Targaryen, Lord Jon Osbracken, and even Sir Stephen Frey, who seemed always drunk and in the company of the camp followers. Many of these men had been in Riverrun when Dany arrived with the king, a maiden still, to meet her betrothed. They had been lively and courteous, making ribald jokes about their wedding to come that even Robb smiled at, dancing with her at each meal. A great number of them had fought against the Ironborn, and some of them hid their fear of the dragons well now. She had not flown often, preferring to let the dragons roam as they would so she could ride with the lords and hear their talk. They would disappear for days, returning for a moment, or a night, staying always aloft, and the host would flinch, and their horses rear each time. The bravest of the lords would bring their horses to ride alongside her then, to make some smiling remark, to show they were not frightened. They hoped to win her favor with their boldness, Dany knew, as though it would mean the dragon's favor too. From the Vale, Lord Jon Arryn and Sir Brynden Tully joined, toasting to little Alysanne, and to Rhaenys. Once the clash of cups was done, Edmure revealed a piece of parchment. By nightfall tomorrow, the Riverlands will be behind us, Edmure declared. When we cross the neck again, it will be as victors. Even so, there are matters best settled before battle. My lady wife has given me 2 daughters, healthy and hale. I would have my eldest daughter Betha follow me as Lady of Riverrun, and rule the Riverlands as my father and grandfathers who came before me. I ask you now to fix your seals to this paper as witnesses. His words lifted Dany's heart as little had these past long months. A woman ruling the Riverlands, as none had before, of the blood of Rhaenys and Rhaegar. Perhaps Betha's own daughter would come after her, and Riverrun would be a Sunspear, with rule passing to the eldest, no matter what was between her legs. Brynden Tully came forward first. He had been at the Vale for many years, but had a claim to Riverrun through Hoster Tully. Instead, he pressed his seal to the parchment. Lord after lord did the same, and when their work was done, Edmure stood before them, proud. It would not be so simple, though Dany wished it would be. If Edmure were to fall, these lords would clamour to be Betha's regents. And Rhaenys was so young herself still. They would fight for her hand too. A dragon would protect them, Egon might have said, when he fought to convince his sister to claim one. But a living mother could do more than a dead one. Edmure's work was not done. Rhaenys would have told him to secure Robb's seal, for Rickon Stark had a claim too. Rickon, not Bran, not anymore. Dany remembered her dream of Bran Stark in the Kingswood, but she could make no more sense of it now than when she'd first woken, confused and weary. Once they were in the north, Dany took to the sky. She hoped the sight of her dragons might give the people of the north heart, and remind them of who fought with them. And it made her feel braver. The world she had once rode through was covered in white, and cold unlike any she had known. The northerners would scoff and say it was nothing, but the icy wind alone, rolling in across the flat expanse of the Barrowlands, was enough to slow them, as each man rode on half-blind, their faces wrapped up in cloaks and scarves. Brideston was rarely within sight, always miles ahead or behind, but from atop Shadowtamer she could see the knights from above marching like some great, winding snake, their plate and mail shining in the cold sun, glittering when the rays caught it. Their banners were the only color left in the world, red and green, purple and blue and black, glimmering across the snow. 100 or more small folk had refused to cross the neck, and turned back the twins and said they would make for a village named Hagsmire. The rest made it through whole with the help of the Crannog men who led them carefully through the narrow causeway that led to Moat Cailin. The first of them died in the Barrowlands. He was old man who had never woken when his wife went to rouse him for the day's march, one of Edmure's knights told her later. They buried him in a shallow grave by the King's Road. 3 days later, the woman who travelled with him was dead too. She had fallen, tripped over some root hidden beneath the snow, and could not rise again. When she died, someone tried to take her shoes and saw her feet were black, and frozen to the leather. Dany came down from the skies after that. It was not hunger nor thirst that killed them, but the cold, and the months of weakness that had worn them down day after day since they fled King's Landing. Atop her dragon, she felt so warm that sweat would pool under her furs, but she could think of no way of sharing that heat with them. Shadowtamer would not suffer himself to be brought so close to the ground, and besides, Dany feared the spears of the soldiers and the bows they carried slung over their backs. She thought to have him spend his flame across the ground instead, but it was just as like to turn the stones of the King's Road molten, and melt through their shoes and their animals' hooves. If she could not save them, she would not turn her eyes away. Each one that died was given a grave, weak children, wrinkled old women, hollow-eyed men with only half their teeth. The soldiers resented each stop. With each step, it grew colder, the wind sharper, and the snow that fell around them was by turns light and vicious. Proud Lord Arryn would not ride in his wheelhouse and remained each day atop his horse, but looked the worse for wear. Beneath their feet, the ground had grown hard and frozen. It took 5 men to dig a grave now, and each time she called for a halt to the march, she knew 100 men cursed her under the breath. But shame stayed their tongues. In Dany's dreams, Winterfell was her bed, and the warmth of her husband, as he might have been if she had never left for Dragonstone. It was her son, still a babe at her breast, new to the world. It was not until they were past the Barrowlands that Dany dared to think of him. It felt too close to be real, as though lingering too long on the thought would wake her, and she would find herself again in some hell. But it was real. It was. The King's Road before them was lost beneath the snow, as were the dead fields and rolling hills, and the trees of the Wolfswood were covered in white. It would have been a sight to see from the skies, but Dany left her dragons to hunt. Whether the tales from King's Landing had reached this far, Dany could not say, but she knew Winterfell had changed. Bran was lost, Lord Eddard was missing, and Sansa, the girl who had dreamed of marrying a Southron prince and loved all things beautiful, was already a widow. This was her family too, and that of her son. Arriving atop a dragon, the movement of Shadowtamer's wings flinging snow and mud through the air, would not do. In King's Landing, she had looked every bit the princess. No, a queen, she thought. Aegon had made sure of that, and she had not wished to see it. She had carried little with her atop Shadowtamer and been in riding clothes more often than not, but Rhaenys had been wiser than her. With her maids, Rhaenys had sent for her a trunk of clothes. Dany picked the most sombre, a plain gown of black velvet and a fur-lined cloak. Winterfell was a changed place. It took only passing through the gates to see it. A cold frost had gripped the Stark's grey castle. Paths were closed before them, treacherous with black ice, and icicles long as lances hung from the battlements and fringed the towers like an old man's stiff white whiskers. Winterfell was less than half as full as they had been a year past, and as its people fell to their knees as they passed, their entourage wielding the banners of Tully, Arryn, Targaryen, and Stark, Dany saw there were so few grooms, and the spearmen and archers that remained with either too young to grow whiskers, or old grizzled men. In the yard where they dismounted, Lady Catelyn and Maester Luwin awaited them. Ned Stark's widow was dressed in black, strained in a way Dany had never seen her before, as though all the youth had been stripped of her. Clinging to her hand was Daenerys' son, dressed like a little lord, in a grey doublet with a white wolf embroidered in the front. Around his shoulders was a wool cloak trimmed with fur that he clung onto with his free hand, and his hair was freshly washed, brushed back with care. If she had thought he favored Robb in looks when he was newly born, it was undeniable now. Even his look was the same, cool and still. Dany longed to reach for him, to pull him into his arms, as she had never wished for anything before. Instead, she turned to Lady Catelyn first and embraced the woman who had lost a husband and a son, whose daughter mourned doubly, who had raised Cregan while Dany was gone, caring for her dragons instead of the child of her own womb. "I'm sorry for your losses," Dany murmured. When they pulled apart, she saw Lady Catelyn's eyes were wet. Quickly, as though to hide it, Lady Catelyn leaned down to Cregan, squeezing his little hand. "Look who it is," Catelyn said, softly, "it's your mother." Cregan stared at her for a long moment, unsure, and looked up at his grandmother. A small smile from her was enough for him to find his courage, and step forward into Dany's arms. She scooped up her son, and kissed him on his forehead. He smelled of soap and something else, something unnameable that reminded her of a fresh, clear morning, and the northern wind that would shake her windows. If he resisted her earlier, he clung to her now as though he remembered her, as though she had been gone but a day, not a year. "He's a very sweet boy," Lady Catelyn said, reaching out to gently put a strand of his hair into place. "He loves to be held." "Thank you," Dany said, "for everything." She left the lady to her kin then. Edmure came forward, embracing her fiercely, and the Blackfish after him and Lord Arryn last, giving his condolences in a hoarse voice, thick with grief. The only thing she wanted now was to be with her son, to question his mates on all she had missed, to watch him walk, to hear what words he might have learned. But Maester Luwin quickly fell in beside her. "My lady, I am pleased to see you well and returned to Winterfell," the Maester said. "There are urgent matters that need your attention." Dany would have preferred to close her ears to him, but she knew she could not. Her son, small and innocent as he was the Stark in Winterfell, and it would be cruelty to play at being the young maid, and leave matters to Lady Catelyn. "Walk with me, Maester." It had begun to snow. "Tell me, what are these matters?" They stepped into the great keep, and the world was warm once more. "We have had your ravens. These small folk that travel with you. We will need to find places for them. The winter town is almost full already, with more arriving each day. If there are young men in their number, I would advise them turned over to Sir Roderick so they might be trained in arms. Lord Stark has taken every man of fighting age, and only a token garrison remains behind to guard Winterfell." Dany thought on it as she walked through the granite hallways, treading the familiar path to her rooms. Only the young and strong had survived their march, and there was nowhere further north they could go, save the wall. "Yes, please see it done." "And the women?" "There are 2 girls who serve me. They were little more than children, as sweet as innocent as her own son, and alone in the world. I would have them remain here, as I would the rest." Maester Luwin's face changed at that. "Surely there is some work for them in the kitchens or the laundry. If I may be frank, we have more than enough hands there, and each is another mouth to feed. To our eyes, it may seem that winter is here, but for the Northerners, this is nothing but late autumn. There are dark times ahead, and if Lord Eddard's warning were true," it seemed as though the words were hard for him to say, "then it will be a winter unlike any other." "Yes." She found herself pulling her son closer to her. He looked at her with Robb's eyes. "We must find a way. They cannot be sent away. I will have the account books sent to your grace for study. We have coin for food and fodder, but King Rhaegar and the Prince of Dragonstone are buying up the markets to the east and Mace Tyrell will not free his stores." The Maester was wise enough to keep his voice even, and his gaze fixed ahead of them. If he harbored any thoughts on why Lord Tyrell might do such a thing, he kept them to himself. "We will think it over together, and find a way," Dany said. There were no more guards at the doors, she noticed, the halls eerily empty. "Where are Arya and Rickon?" The Maester frowned. "Since news reached us of Lord Eddard's passing, Rickon has been as wild as his wolf. When he is not with his mother, he hides in the Godswood or goes to search for his father in the crypts. And Arya. She is even worse, if I may say so, by turns angry and tearful. Dany could not blame her. In Riverrun, Robb's little sister had been hopeful that Bran might be alive, and any day he would return. The sight of the dragons had not cowed her. She had raced outside to catch a glimpse of them, and spoke endlessly of all she had learned of them from old Nan's tales, wondering which were true. It seemed though that she had lost hope, as had all of Winterfell. They came to the door of her room now. And what of Sansa? Lord Robb has deemed that she is to remain in Carhold for now, and wed Lord Rickard's second son, when the war is done. A wise choice, I believe. And one that Sansa would have accepted bitterly. Dany's own marriage had been negotiated with the provision that the Starks would